Chapter 657. The Jing tribe wasn't big. They had less than 1,000 people, not even half the size of the drumming tribe. They weren't a battle-type tribe either. However, no matter how small a tribe was, they couldn't be underestimated. After Xiaofan entered the Jing tribe, he only saw wild fruits and vegetables, fish, and some small animals. A non-battle-type tribe had limited attack power, so the prey they could hunt was also limited. The prey in the back should have been caught with the drumming tribe's nets. However, this tribe with less than 1,000 people had a bigger territory than the drumming tribe. Of course, in this remote place where there were few people and no one owned the land, the boundaries were all drawn by themselves. In theory, they could claim as much land as they wanted. However, there were many factors involved. If the territory was too big, the guards wouldn't be able to keep up, and there would be too many gaps. If they overestimated themselves and claimed the territory, they would be digging their own grave. Therefore, the territory of each tribe was determined according to their own tribe's ability. The Jing tribe obviously wasn't stupid. How could a tribe that could survive until now be stupid? How could they not understand this? But they still claimed such a big territory. After going deeper into the Jing tribe, Xiaofan found the answer to this question. More than half of the Jing tribe's territory was quagmires. If one looked down from the sky, all the quagmires in the Jing tribe looked like an eye, corresponding to the eye pattern on the Jing tribe's totem. The quagmires formed a barrier that prevented dangerous creatures from approaching the tribe. Within the Jing tribe, there was a large, circular quagmires in the middle of the tribe. The Jing tribe's houses were also built like a fence, but they weren't as tall and complicated as the drumming tribe's houses. Most of the Jing tribe's houses were built on the ground. Only the shaman's house was built above the quagmires in the middle. From the shape of the quagmires, the Jing tribe probably made the quagmires themselves. Otherwise, why would they be in the shape of an eye? The Jing shaman brought them into the tribe. Because there weren't enough houses for all the Yinjiao tribesmen, the Jing shaman welcomed them outside the house. However, the Jing shaman still brought Xiaofan to the house in the middle of the quagmires to discuss matters. Before this, the Jing shaman asked Xiaofan if they should discuss in another house or go to the quagmires in the middle of the tribe. Xiaofan chose the latter. This choice made the Jing people sigh in relief. Although they didn't reject the Yinjiao people as much because of the drumming tribe, they were still on guard against them. The central quagmire was close to the fire pit of the tribe. According to the traditional thinking of the tribesmen, the closer to the fire pit, the safer it would be. Xiaofan's choice surprised the Jing shaman. However, he was only surprised for a moment and did not ask for the reason. He asked the others to wait outside the quagmire while the Xiaofan walked along a wooden bridge built over the quagmire. He followed the shaman to the Jing tribe's largest and most special house built over the quagmire. The Jing tribe was the same as the drumming tribe. Shamans had a high status in the tribe. In the Jing tribe, the position of chief was dispensable. In the history of the Jing tribe, there were many times when there was no chief. The shaman held many positions and had absolute power. Basically, no one in the tribe dared to refute his words. The shaman was the only one who had the final say. The Jing shaman opened the door to the wooden house. When he brought Xiaofan in, he quickly glanced at Xiaofan's face. He noticed that Xiaofan didn't show any expression because he was close to the fire pit. This made the Jing shaman even more surprised. Xiaofan observed the wooden house built over the quagmire. In the Jing tribe, this was considered a luxurious house. Not only was it big, but it was also built with great care. A lot of thought was put into the materials and design. Although it was mostly made of wood, it looked very sturdy and didn't look shabby. After entering the house, Xiaofan saw some decorations made of ground ice stones placed in obvious places. One of them was made of high-quality ground ice stones piled up to form a pagoda. At the top, there was a green, universal eye. This universal eye was twice as big as the 9 universal eyes the shaman gave Xiaofan. The colorless parts were almost transparent, and the green parts were crystal clear. It looked like a real beast's eye, but it didn't make people feel cold. Instead, they had the desire to keep staring at it. No wonder this was where the shaman lived. Even the stones were bigger and better looking than other people's. Seeing that Xiaofan stared at the universal eye with only surprise and curiosity, there was no greed in his eyes. The Jing shaman's expression softened, and he revealed a rare friendly smile. He didn't even realize that he was showing off. He explained to Xiaofan, "That was passed down by my ancestors. It's more than 800 years old now." "It's old." "Old?" Xiaofan didn't understand why the shaman would use this word. Wasn't this just a stone? Understanding what Xiaofan was thinking, the Jing shaman continued, "Of course it will grow old and die. Ground eye stones have a lifespan. The universal eye can live for hundreds or even thousands of years, but normal ground eye stones can't. They can only live for about 100 years, and many will close their eyes forever after a few decades." This statement made people's hair stand on end, but Xiaofan understood what it meant. "Where do they come from?" Xiaofan asked again. Ground eye stones were naturally formed and not man-made. "Where did they come from? Where do they come from?" The Jing shaman slowly stroked his beard. "They come from the ground eyes. They are taken out from the bodies of ground eyes." "What are ground eyes?" "They are a type of beast that lives underground. This kind of stone was taken out from the bodies of animals." After the Jing shaman's explanation, Xiaofan thought of the reason. Just like how pearls had a shelf life, the ground eye stones, that were produced from the bodies of animals also had a shelf life. The better the quality of the ground eye stone, the longer the shelf life. In other words, these ground eye stones would die after their shelf life, and would never open their eyes again. After explaining the origin of the ground eye stones, the Jing shaman kept his mouth shut about the universal eye and the eye, unwilling to talk more about it. "You said you have something to discuss, what is it?" the Jing shaman asked. Although the Gu shaman's cloth scroll mentioned something, it only said that Yanjiao was interested in the ground eye stones, and advised them to use the ground eye stones to exchange for more things with Yanjiao. Other than that, there was nothing else. "You must already know that we are very interested in the ground eye stones, including the normal ground eye stones, the 1 in 10,000 universal eyes, and the eye." At the end of his sentence, Xiaofan raised his finger and pointed between his eyebrows, but his eyes were looking at the Jing shaman. His meaning couldn't be clearer. Hearing this, the Jing shaman's friendly face immediately darkened, and a fierce look flashed across his eyes. "Your goal is this?" Xiaofan was still calm, and said calmly, "We have a lot of beautiful stones, and we also have other tools and methods to point out the direction. I came here this time for this stone. I don't know what you call it, but I just want to exchange it with you." "Impossible." The Jing shaman stood up and stared straight at Xiaofan. "I know Yanjiao is strong, but it's useless to you even if you want it. Without the Jing bloodline, you can't merge with it. It has nothing to do with strength. The ground eye stones might be related to the Jing fire seed. People with different bloodlines and different fire seed abilities might have a strong rejection towards it, and it would be impossible to merge with it." "I know that," Xiaofan said. "What I want to know is, can this thing be used on fearsome beasts?" The Jing shaman didn't wait for Xiaofan to finish speaking and already wanted to reject him, but after hearing Xiaofan's words, he immediately froze. He looked at Xiaofan as if he was looking at a crazy person. The Jing shaman's gaze was too direct, but the Xiaofan didn't have any other thoughts. He still stared at the Jing shaman, waiting for his answer. "You want to use it on fearsome beasts?" "Yes. A fearsome beast that lost an eye." The Jing shaman took a deep breath and exhaled heavily. His eyebrows were squeezed together, and there were many wrinkles on both sides of the line between his eyebrows. After a while, the Jing shaman finally spoke. "I've never tried it before." Maybe the ancestors of the Jing tribe had tried it before, but there were no relevant records left behind. Plus, the Jing tribe migrated here 1,000 years ago. Their tribe moved along with the river, so they had to choose a place near the river that wouldn't dry up during the dry season. 1,000 years ago, the ancestors of the Jing tribe chose this river that formed after the disaster. This river became the Flaming River after the second disaster. Compared to other tribes, the Jing tribe's migration frequency was relatively high. Because of this, many ancient records were lost during the migration. Most of the records that the Jing tribe had were left behind after they migrated here. But after they came here, other than the fearsome beasts that lived at the edge of the forest for the first 2 years, the Jing people had never come into contact with fearsome beasts until now. That was why the Jing shaman couldn't answer Xiaoxian's question. "Then do you have any extra eyes?" Xiaoxian asked. The Jing shaman was just about to reject him, but he suddenly thought of something and stopped himself. He fell silent. Xiaoxian raised his eyebrows when he saw the shaman's reaction. Xiaoxian originally thought that the shaman would strongly reject him, so he prepared a countermeasure. Yanjiao had a lot of things to offer, so he might be able to force the shaman to open his mouth. But now, it seemed like this shaman's attitude wasn't right. There was a chance. Xiaoxian didn't rush him and waited for him to consider. About 2 minutes later, the Jing shaman probed, "I heard that the Yanjiao tribe is very powerful and has many things that others don't have. Is that true?" "What do you mean?" Xiaoxian asked. "Weapons? Food? Or something else? Can the Yanjiao tribe heal injuries?" The Jing shaman looked at Xiaoxian with a gaze that wasn't harsh. Instead, it was filled with anticipation. Xiaoxian's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't show it on his face. He continued to ask, "That depends on what kind of injury it is." "It's a serious injury. He can't walk." The Jing shaman's face was dark, as if he thought of something bad. "You need to see him to know." "Without seeing his condition, I can't give you an answer," Xiaoxian said. "Sure. If you can heal him, I'll give you an eye." Chapter 658. For the shaman to care so much, this person must have a special relationship with him. The shaman's house on the central quagmire was very big. Although it was only 1 floor, there were no less than 20 rooms of different sizes. Xiaoxian followed the shaman to a room in the corner. It was a big room. When Xiaoxian went over, a woman walked out with a sad face. When she saw the shaman bring Xiaoxian over, she was surprised for a moment. Then, she thought of something and her eyes lit up with excitement. She wanted to ask the shaman something, but the shaman raised his hand to stop her. The door opened and Xiaoxian looked inside. There was only one bed in the room. It was made of wood and covered with animal skin. A person was lying on it, covered with a layer of linen. Looking at the complicated patterns, it should be from the drumming tribe. When Xiaoxian went in, the person was looking outside the window, but he turned his head to look at him. He should be a very young person, but he didn't seem to be in good condition. Not only was he thin, but he also didn't have any energy. It was just a small movement of turning his head, but it was very difficult for him to do it. It was like a rusty machine that was stuck. Every movement was like he was struggling to break free from something. Xiaoxian also noticed that when the person turned his head, the veins on his face, neck, and exposed arms suddenly bulged. It looked like there were worms wriggling on them. Not only that, the bulging veins were very dark. This was not normal. The Jing people that Xiaoxian saw on his way here were not like this. When the person looked over, his eyes were not focused, as if he couldn't see anyone. Was this the patient the shaman talked about? Father? The person on the bed called out. His voice was very soft. It looked like he just opened his mouth. If it wasn't for Xiaofan's good hearing, he probably wouldn't have heard what he just said. So it was the shaman's son. No wonder the shaman was so emotional when he talked about him. It's okay. Father came to see you. Rest well. The Jing shaman walked over and carefully tidied up the messy hair of the person on the bed. Then, he pulled up the linen cloth on the person's body slightly. It's almost night. Be careful of the cold. At this time of the year, even at night, the temperature was relatively high. Many tribesmen slept naked at night, but the one on the bed was not only sleeping on furry animal skin, but also covered with a thin quilt. He was seriously ill. Xiaofan shifted his vision and looked at the person on the bed. Through the linen cloth and clothes, Xiaofan could see the bones inside the man's body. Now, Xiaofan could also see the meridians, but the color of the meridians was much lighter than that of the bones. Generally, Xiaofan mainly looked at the bones. This time, Xiaofan discovered that this person's bones did not have much of a problem. There were signs of fractures, but they had gone through a recovery period. It was just that they had not fully recovered. Even so, this kind of injury was not enough to put this person in such a situation. The problem was the messy meridians in his body. In the human body, blood flowed through the meridians, from the internal organs to the surface of the skin. When a totemic warrior used his totemic power, a large part of the totemic power flowed through the meridians and circulated throughout the body. If the meridians were damaged, then they would not be able to use their totemic power normally. Without totemic power, a totemic warrior was no different from an unawakened person. But this person in front of him was not only unable to use his totemic power, he could not even maintain the most basic of daily activities. When the Jing shaman came out of the house, his eyes were still red. He would only show this kind of emotion in front of his son. After leaving the house and walking for a while, the Jing shaman asked his wife, who wanted to speak but was hesitating, "How is he today?" The woman's eyes dimmed. He only drank some water. During the disaster last year, the Jing tribe was affected. The Jing shaman's son, Miao, was also injured at that time. He was injured while trying to save a few children in the tribe. Because of this, the Jing shaman didn't see the children's families for a year. He didn't speak to them at all. The injuries in Miao's body were caused by overusing his totemic power. It was like a road. Overloaded cars kept passing through the road, causing the road to collapse. Some parts of the road even collapsed completely. The parts that didn't collapse could barely maintain their daily activities, such as walking and eating. But soon, Miao's injuries worsened. In the end, he couldn't even walk anymore. This kind of situation would only worsen if it couldn't be fixed. First, he couldn't move his legs. Then, there were problems with his internal organs. He ate less and less food. Even if he forced himself to eat more, he would vomit it out. There was one time when he almost choked to death. After that, he couldn't even move his arms. Until now, he can only move his head. He eats less and less. 10 days ago, he could still drink fish soup. Now, he can't even drink soup. He can only drink water. The woman's voice was choked with sobs when she spoke. Although the Jing shaman wasn't as emotional, he couldn't hide the sadness on his face. It was obvious that he cared a lot about his son. The Jing shaman knew that the Gu shaman hoped that they could get more food and tools from the Yanjiao people. But what he cared about the most wasn't food and tools. It was his son who was still lying on the bed. He had a bright future, but because of a catastrophe, he could only lie on the bed every day. He would rather the people in the tribe die than let his son suffer such serious injuries. The Jing shaman was never a generous person. He was biased and selfish. He never hid his true nature. Logically speaking, the Jing tribe wouldn't let the true eye be passed on to outsiders. But for his son, the Jing shaman didn't care about that. No one in the tribe dared to go against him. Even if the ancestors who passed away jumped out to stop him, he would still do as he wished. The decision he made was the final one. Elder Xiaofan, do you have any ideas? The Jing shaman suppressed the sadness in his heart and stared straight at the Xiaofan. He didn't want to miss any slight change in the Xiaofan's expression. The Xiaofan didn't say anything. He lowered his eyes and thought. If it was an epidemic or poisoning, he could take out the medicine that the Guizhe gave him and try it out. But Miu's injuries were caused by severe damage to his meridians. The Xiaofan didn't dare to say anything about other things, but if it was a meridian injury, there was definitely a way to treat it. Many Yanjiao people who were injured in the earthquake last year had severe damage to their meridians. According to the treatment methods of many tribes, they might cripple their limbs or even endanger their lives. But with the veins of the sky, things were different. Not only could they save their limbs, but they could also save their lives. However, the veins of the sky had experienced the Great Migration and 2 transplants in Yanjiao. Ever since they were planted, they had been carefully cared for. When they were first transplanted, they weren't in good condition. So everyone decided not to touch them for the next 2 years. They would only touch them after the transplanted veins of the sky had adapted to the new environment. Last year, the veins of the sky that the injured people in the tribe ate was actually the one that the Xiaofan had first dug up as an experiment. Later on, part of the veins of the sky was eaten by the tribesmen, and the other part was given to the shaman and the Guizhe to experiment on pills. After all, the veins of the sky that were dug up didn't have a long shelf life. They tried their best to preserve the medicinal properties of the veins of the sky. In the end, only 5 pills were made. The current chief and shaman each had 1, the 2 team leaders each had 1, and the last one was in the Xiaofan's hands. He had brought it with him this time. But there was only 1. Seeing the Xiaofan like this, the Jing shaman's eyes flashed. If it can be cured, I'll find the eye for you. The Xiaofan looked up at the Jing shaman. Can you really find it? Yes. The Jing shaman stood up excitedly and vowed, as long as it can cure Miu, I'll find it for you. How many can you find? The Xiaofan asked. 1. Afraid that the Xiaofan would misunderstand, the Jing shaman quickly explained, it's very difficult to find the true eye. It's already rare to find one every year. It's impossible for 2 to appear at the same time. So it was called the true eye. The Xiaofan asked again, since it's hard to find one every year, how can you guarantee that you'll find one this year? I haven't looked for the true eye this year, but I can try. The full moon is coming soon, and the chances of the true eye appearing then are the highest. The Jing shaman explained. I see, the Xiaofan nodded. I have a medicine that might help with Miu's injuries. But we only have 1 in our entire team. I understand. The Jing shaman interrupted. If you want the true eye, I'll find it for you. If I can't find one this year, I'll continue next year. I swear on my name, if you can cure my son's illness, I'll definitely find the true eye for you. I'm not sure if your son's injuries can be used. You can try. Don't worry, Elder Xiaofan. Even if I can't cure Miu, as long as he can walk like a normal person and continue to live, I'll find the true eye for you, the Jing shaman said seriously. It was rare to see hope, so he wouldn't give up. The Xiaofan was silent for a while, then said, I don't have the medicine with me. I'll go get it first. Sure, the Jing shaman was very enthusiastic. Do you need me to send someone over? No, I'll be back soon, the Xiaofan stood up. The Jing shaman hurriedly led the way. After personally leading the Xiaofan out, he followed him for a while. If it weren't for the tribesmen reporting that the Ya tribe was coming, he would have followed the Xiaoxian to the river to get the medicine. The tribe? What are they doing here? The Jing shaman watched the Xiaoxian walk towards the river bank, then turned and walked away unhappily. The tribe also had underground caves here, so they were all old acquaintances. Two tribesmen came over. They were brothers, called Di Pai and Di Pa. When the Jing shaman walked over, the two of them were still in disbelief. The Yanjiao people got here before us? Why are you here? The Jing shaman asked. We're just afraid that you'll get into a conflict with the Yanjiao people. Di Pai took out a cloth scroll and threw it over. Zhen gave this to you. Didn't he already write one? The Jing shaman took the cloth scroll and looked at it. His mouth twitched. What's the point of telling me now? The Jing shaman remembered that the cloth scroll he gave the Yanjiao didn't mention anything about the true eye. He was also worried that the Jing shaman would get angry if the Yanjiao mentioned the true eye. After all, the Jing shaman's temper had worsened because of Miao. He hadn't been in a good mood for the past year. He didn't want to explode when something like this happened. That was why the Jing shaman asked the tribesmen to come over and wrote a letter. Unfortunately, the two tribesmen were one step behind the Yanjiao people. Okay, I know. I've already talked to the Yanjiao Grand Elder. They didn't fight, Di Pa muttered. His tone sounded regretful. The Jing shaman ignored him and pretended that he was talking nonsense. Hey, if we didn't bring the letter, would you have let the Yanjiao people into your tribe so easily? Aren't you afraid of being tricked by the cloth scroll they gave you? I heard that the Yanjiao people are very strong. You can't beat them, Di Pai asked. You think I'm stupid? The Jing shaman glanced at them disdainfully and said meaningfully, I have eyes. I can see. We have eyes too. The two brothers said in unison. The Jing shaman smiled. Let me tell you a joke, the tribesmen have eyes. Di Pai and Di Pa were speechless. So what if you have good eyesight? So what if you have 3 eyes? The two brothers snorted unhappily and dug into the ground again. Underground was more suitable for them. They didn't need to see clearly under the Yangguang. They only needed to be sharp enough in the dark underground. Chapter 659. The pill made from the roots of the veins of the sky was about the size of a pinky finger, but the veins of the sky only made up 1/10 of it. The remaining 90% was made up of other supplementary herbs. Some were used as buffers to reduce the side effects of the medicine if it was too strong. This was to prevent people with weak bodies from being unable to withstand the effects of the medicine too quickly. Some were used to maintain the effects of the veins of the sky for a longer period of time. In other words, it was to increase the shelf life of the medicine. As for the bottle that contained the veins of the sky, it wasn't made of bronze, pottery, or stone. It was made of jade. According to the Guizhe, jade had the best preservation effect. Although the Jing shaman had never seen jade before, he could tell that the bottle was very valuable. He couldn't tell why, but he could only see the conclusion. The Xiaoxian poured out the pill, give him half of it first and see how it works. Miao couldn't swallow the medicine right now, so the small half of the pill was ground up and put into water. Then, he poured it out bit by bit for the person on the bed to drink. The Jing shaman and his wife took care of Miao carefully. After all, Miao's injuries were very serious. Before, he would vomit everything he drank except for water. Now, the Jing shaman and his wife could only try to feed him little by little. The Xiaoxian saw that the wooden spoon was even smaller than his pinky nail. After feeding him a few spoonfuls, the Jing shaman saw that Miao didn't vomit out the medicine he swallowed this time. He was overjoyed. This was a good sign. After feeding him the medicine, the Jing shaman brought the Xiaoxian to walk around the tribe and told him how the true eye came to be. Normal ground eye stones and universal eye stones will be in the quagmire outside, but the true eye will only be here. The Jing shaman pointed at his feet. I think you already guessed it. The Jing shaman was in a good mood, so it was rare for him to be so talkative. The better the ground eye, the closer it is to the fire pit. The Jing fire pit was in the middle of the quagmire. The Xiaofan stood in the house and could see a muddy yellow light not far away. It wasn't bright, but it was hard to ignore. Even if the fire seed was just a spark, it could be felt immediately. Actually, the Jing fire seed wasn't strong, but it was special. Their fire seed was very attractive to creatures like the ground eyes. Ground eyes lived underground, and no one knew how deep they could go. Very few people could dig them out. Even the tribesmen, who lived underground all year round, had never dug them out. However, in the Jing tribe, those strange creatures that lived underground would appear on their own. The Jing tribe's large swamp was actually for those ground eyes. Sometimes, those ground eyes would swim around in the swamp, and the Jing people would catch those ground eyes. They would eat their flesh and leave the ground eye stones inside. To some extent, the Jing people often hunted, but they didn't hunt wild beasts. Instead, they hunted the ground eyes in the quagmire. So they were hunting in the quagmire. Xiaofan saw some Jing children squatting by the quagmire and stirring it with wooden sticks. He thought they were digging for earthworms, but it turned out that they were practicing hunting ground eyes. That day, the Jing tribe served Xiaofan and the others bowls of ground eye soup. The ground eye was a spindle-shaped creature with a hard shell. When it moved underground, it would spin and move forward. That was why there were obvious spiral patterns on its hard shell. After breaking open the hard shell, the meat inside would be used to cook, and the ground eye stones would be taken out. Ground eye meat was the Jing tribe's highest grade food. If they weren't important guests, they wouldn't serve this to them. The Jing shaman let people serve Xiaofan and the others some ground eye meat to show their welcome. This was already considered the Jing tribe's highest level of etiquette. The Jing people mainly caught ground eyes from the large circle of quagmire outside the quagmire. They would sink the nets they used to catch the ground eyes, then fish them out again. It seemed simple, but in reality, they could only catch one ground eye every 10 times. Those with good eyesight had a higher success rate, but those with bad eyesight had a harder time. The muddy water made it impossible for people to see what was underneath. Perhaps only experienced people could accurately cast the nets. The Jing shaman mainly brought Xiaofan and the others to the central quagmire. The true eye only appeared here. To determine whether there was a true eye here, the Jing shaman only needed to look. He opened the third eye between his eyebrows. It was a dark brown eye. It didn't look much different from the Jing shaman's own eyes, except that the color was a little darker. However, this eye was vertically long. It was at a 90-degree angle with the Jing shaman's two normal eyes. When it blinked, the eyelids would open and close. This special eye had a strange penetrating power. When you looked into that eye, it seemed like it could see through people and see things that other people couldn't. The Jing shaman opened that eye and looked around the quagmire. He shook his head regretfully. I didn't see any ground eyes with true eyes. I'll come back tomorrow. Don't worry, I'll definitely find one for you. He was afraid that the Xiaofan would stop the supply of medicine, so the Jing shaman was very enthusiastic about finding the true eye. However, there were some things that the Jing shaman still said after some hesitation. I can only guarantee that I'll find the true eye. If 1 year isn't enough, then 2 years. If 2 years isn't enough, then 10 years. However, I can't guarantee that you'll be able to successfully place it on a fearsome beast. Even most of the Jing people can't successfully merge it with a beast. The Jing shaman was afraid that the Xiaofan was just using the fearsome beast as an excuse, so he emphasized again, anyway, you can't use it on a human. I know. I won't use it on a human. I'm just trying it on a fearsome beast. No matter how high the chances of success are, we still have to try. The Jing shaman nodded and didn't say anything else. He had already reminded the Jing shaman. He didn't care if the other person listened or not. He was only responsible for finding the true eye. After walking around the quagmire for a while, the Jing shaman suggested to the Xiaoxian, finding the true eye isn't something that can be done in 1 or 2 days. Elder Xiaoxian, do you want me to send it to the Yanjiao tribe after I find it, or do you want to wait here for a few more days? You know, the night of the full moon will arrive in 3 days. At that time, the true eye is most likely to appear. All right. After hearing the Xiaoxian's reply, the Jing shaman's face lit up with joy. The reason why he said this was because he hoped that the Xiaoxian would stay here for a while. At least, he wanted to wait until his son's injuries were healed before he left. As for whether he could really find the true eye that day, even he wasn't sure. He only said that it was possible. If he was unlucky, he would have to continue waiting. But if Xiaoxian wanted to leave by then, the Jing shaman wouldn't stop him. Since the Xiaoxian decided to stay here for a few more days, the Yanjiao people started hunting. There were many beasts in this area that the Jing people didn't want to provoke. The Yanjiao people went to take care of those beasts, and the Jing people were happy to see that. They didn't feel like their prey was stolen. Most of the beasts they hunted were wild beasts. Although the Yanjiao people didn't care about them, to the Jing people, they were still quite attractive. Duo Li and the others used the beasts they hunted to trade with the Jing people for some normal ground eye stones and ground eye meat. However, even if the Jing people had universal eyes, they didn't have many of them. Plus, the Jing shaman had to approve the trade. If the Jing shaman didn't allow them to trade with universal eyes, they wouldn't take them out no matter what. After the Jing shaman knew about this, he only thought for a while. Then he waved his hand and approved the trade. So, those who had hunted down universal eyes and kept them, and those who were willing to trade went to the Yanjiao people to negotiate. They could trade with the Yanjiao people for fearsome beast meat, beast hides, horns, and teeth. Originally, Duo Li and the others thought that after the Jing shaman allowed it, the Jing people would be very willing to trade with them. However, the reality was that the number of people who were willing to trade with universal eyes could be counted on one hand. Among the normal ground eye stones they were willing to trade, there weren't many that were of high quality. However, Duo Li and the others didn't care about the ground eye stones that were of lower quality. Because of this, even after the Jing shaman agreed to the trade, Duo Li and the others' gains were still pitifully small. I really don't understand. Why did they hide those stones? Duo Li looked at the 2 universal eyes in his hand with a conflicted expression. These were the results of his 2 days of trading. He only had 2. There were hundreds of normal ground eye stones in the wooden box beside him. Those were the best of the best, but compared to what the Jing people had, it wasn't even 1/20th of them. They don't travel far, so they don't need the universal eyes. They don't even want to trade the ground eye stones that are slightly better. Why did they hide them? They can't be eaten. Tuo and the others were also very confused. They really didn't understand what the Jing people were thinking. Xiaoxian got the answer to this question from the Jing shaman. To the Jing people, the ground eye stones were wealth and also their spiritual food. The more valuable the ground eye stones they had, the more satisfied they would be. In the Jing people's history, there were even people who would rather starve to death with a box of ground eye stones than trade it for food with other tribes. This was impossible for the Yanjiao people. The Yanjiao people also couldn't understand the Jing people's different values. No wonder I've never seen any ground eye stones in the outside world, Xiaoxian sighed. Maybe some tribes used to have ground eye stones, but ever since the Jing people moved here 1,000 years ago, they didn't interact much with the outside world. After a long time, the ground eye stones passed their expiration date and started to die. Gradually, no more ground eye stones appeared in the outside world. However, if you like it, Elder Xiaoxian, I can give you another box. That's my private collection, the Jing shaman said with a smile. His son's condition was getting better, so the Jing shaman was in a better mood. On this day, Xiaofan gave the last bit of medicine to the Jing shaman. Miao could now eat some liquid food. He looked a lot better, not as lifeless as he was the day before. His eyes were also brighter, and he could focus when he looked at people. How is it? The Jing shaman asked Miao nervously. I can see now. Miao's voice was still not loud, but it was better than the day before when he could only talk. Really? Good, good, good. The Jing shaman was overjoyed. He thought of something and moved Xiaofan out from behind him. He introduced him to Miao. This is the Grand Elder of the Yanjiao tribe, Xiaofan. It's all thanks to his medicine that you can recover. Miao looked at Xiaofan when he heard this. Actually, every time the Jing shaman brought Xiaofan here, he would know. It was only because his eyes had been injured for a long time that he couldn't see. This was the first time he saw Xiaofan with his own eyes. However, just as Miao was about to thank him, his gaze on Xiaofan froze. The smile on his face froze. Miao closed his eyes and looked at Xiaofan again. He forced a stiff smile and said dryly, "Thank you, Elder Xiaofan." Miao then said, "I can see now. It's still hard to see things, so it's not very clear." This was an explanation for his loss of composure just now. Xiaofan looked at Miao, and Miao averted his eyes. Xiaofan looked at the Jing shaman again. The Jing shaman smiled apologetically, then turned to his wife and said, "Bring Elder Xiaofan to see the gift I've prepared." The gift he was talking about was the box of ground ice stones that he wanted to give to Xiaofan. Xiaofan followed the woman out of the room. Before he left, he looked back at the Jing shaman and his son before leaving. After Xiaofan left, the Jing shaman closed the wooden plank that acted as the door and walked to the bedside. Miao's hands under the linen cloth were clenched tightly because of nervousness. He only let go after Xiaofan left. His palms were sweaty. "Father," behind him, "there's, Shu, it's enough that you know. Don't say it out loud." After Xiaofan followed the Jing shaman's wife to get a box of ground ice stones, he didn't stay there any longer. Instead, he went to look for the other Yanjiao people. Duo Li and the others were watching the Jing people teach the children how to catch ground ice stones. When they saw Xiaofan come over, they were about to express their thoughts when Xiaofan asked, "Is there anything strange on me?" "No." Duo Li was confused. He didn't understand why Xiaofan suddenly asked this. "What about behind you?" Xiaofan turned around and looked at Duo Li. Then, he looked at the others. They all shook their heads, as if they didn't see anything strange. That was strange. What did the Jing shaman and his son see? Xiaofan knew that Miao's gaze wasn't fixed on him, but behind him. His gaze wasn't focused on Xiaofan, but on his surroundings. What did he mean by, he just recovered his vision and couldn't see clearly? Chapter 660. Xiaofan knew that the Jing shaman and his son must have seen something, but they didn't want to talk about it. Soon, it was the day of the full moon. There wasn't much difference between night and day. Even at night, it was still bright because of the moon. The change between night and day, the rotation of the sun and the moon. Anything related to the sun and the moon would change on this day. Just like how the drumming tribe used to harvest water moon stones on this day, the Jing people were also very busy because the ground eyes would be very active on this day. They would even float above the quagmire. The Jing people were already waiting by the quagmire early in the morning. Some of them were holding tightly woven nets, while others were holding tools made from horns and bones. At first, they were just waiting by the quagmire with long tools. If they saw a ground eye coming out of the quagmire, they would immediately attack. Those who were fast enough would use the long scoop to scoop up the ground eye the moment it appeared. This was the only day they could use this method to catch a ground eye quickly. Xiaofan saw a Jing warrior shout excitedly after he scooped up the ground eye. He poured out the thing in the scoop far away from the quagmire. A spindle-shaped object about the length of a palm was poured out along with the muddy water. As it spun, the muddy water was flung out quickly, revealing a dark gray shell on its body. That was the ground eye. Seeing it trying to drill into the ground, the Jing warrior quickly used a bone knife to push it to the side, then threw a rock at it. Their attacks were very accurate. The rock landed on one side of the ground eye, not in the middle of the ground eye's body. If they didn't use the right amount of force, the spindle-shaped ground eye would fly out. But if they used the right amount of force, the rock would only make the spinning ground eye half dead. The ground eye would also stop spinning. That way, the ground eye would lose its ability to move. They could just put it aside or cut it open. Xiaofan saw that person cut open the ground eye they just caught. Under the dark gray shell, the flesh was white. When the flesh was cut open, they would see the round ball in the middle of the ground eye's body. That was the ground eye stone. Because there were too many people gathered here, Xiaofan couldn't see the quality of the stone inside the ground eye that person cut open. But from the cheers in the crowd, he knew that it was a good stone. Every year at this time, the person who caught the most ground eyes with the best quality would be recorded in the Jing tribe's history book. It would be passed down to the next generation along with the shaman's notes. This was an honor that every Jing person yearned for. To the Jing people, this was a winner in life. Not only would their name be recorded in history, but their status in the tribe would also rise. No wonder everyone in the Jing tribe was so excited. With the first person to catch a ground eye today, the others didn't want to be left behind. Around the outer circle of the quagmire, you could see the Jing people running around. The children who didn't have the ability to catch a ground eye were watching from the sidelines. Once they heard that someone had caught a ground eye, they would run over to watch the show and guess who would be the winner this year. Inside the shaman's house, the father and son were talking about this year's full moon's night. Miao could now walk with the help of others, but he couldn't walk for long distances yet. Proper exercise could reduce the side effects of being bedridden for a year, but too much was as bad as not enough. If he rushed for results, he would only get half the result with twice the effort. Not only would he not be able to recover quickly, but it would also increase the burden on his body before he fully recovered. The shaman helped Miao walk around the house a few times and then sat down to rest. If you weren't injured, you would have definitely gotten first place this year. The shaman's words carried a hint of regret. Miao didn't feel any regret. It's okay. Next year is fine too. It's just a year late. That's true. You're already very lucky to be able to recover. Oh yeah, Dad, are you going to find the true eye for that person in Yanjiao tonight? Miao asked. Of course. It'll be best if you can find it. If not, I'll probably have to wait another year. After all, the chances of finding the true eye at other times are too low. Don't worry. Even if you can't find it this year, that person won't blame me. The shaman comforted him. Miao's brows didn't relax because of the shaman's words. Dad, who's behind that person? Is it one of Yanjiao's ancestors? Maybe. Those who have the ancestors' protection are always very lucky. Maybe we'll really find the true eye this year. Speaking of which, when I saw it, I was so scared that I almost opened my eyes. Miao's heart was still pounding. At that time, I felt a piercing pain in my eyes. They haven't completely healed yet. Hearing this, the shaman immediately became nervous. Your eyes are injured? Let me see. Totemic patterns appeared on Miao's body. Because his injuries hadn't completely healed, he carefully controlled the totemic patterns to only circulate above his torso when he used his totemic power. The greenish-black meridians protruded and mixed with the totemic patterns that appeared, looking very scary. At the same time, a crack appeared between Miao's eyebrows. Just like how the shaman opened his third eye when he was searching for the true eye for Xiaofan, the third eye that appeared between Miao's eyebrows also opened. In the entire Jing tribe, other than the shaman, no one else knew that Miao had a third eye. His third eye appeared the year he awakened his totemic power. At that time, the shaman was quite shocked. After asking around, he analyzed the reason for Miao's current condition. It might be because he ate a ground eye that didn't have a ground eye stone before he awakened his totemic power. Miao had caught that ground eye by himself when he was setting up a net under the quagmire. It was quite big, and it had also been a full moon day. After Miao had caught it, it had aroused the curiosity of many people. Everyone had said that they might find a universal eye, but who would have thought that after cutting it open, there would be nothing. Not even the most basic ground eye. However, not long after that, after Miao awakened his totemic power, a third eye appeared between his eyebrows. The shaman guessed that the ground eye that Miao ate probably had a ground eye stone, but its ground eye stone was special. It was hidden and couldn't be touched or seen. Just like the third eye on Miao's body, unless he opened it on his own, there wouldn't be any trace of it. He was no different from the others in the tribe. The shaman planned to wait until he was old and Miao was strong enough to take over the tribe. Then, he would catch a true eye to hide it and let the tribesmen know about Miao's third eye. Who knew that the world would change last year, and Miao would almost die in that disaster? The shaman felt that all his hopes had collapsed. Luckily, work harder this year. Even if you don't find a true eye, catch a few more universal eyes. Treat it as a thank you gift. The shaman still wanted to be on good terms with the Xiaoxian. It had nothing to do with the Yanjiao tribe, but it was because of the blurry figure behind Xiaoxian. The shaman looked at Miao's third eye carefully and didn't find anything strange. Move your eyeball and try to see what's outside. Can you see anything? The shaman asked. Yes. Miao could see through the wooden house's floorboards and the blurry figures in the quagmire. Those were all ground eyes. He could even see further outside the house, at the quagmire, the tribesmen who were busy working. He could see the Yanjiao people standing around and watching. The Xiaoxian, who was watching someone dissect a ground eye, suddenly raised his head and looked in a certain direction. What's wrong? Tua asked. Nothing. The Xiaoxian retracted his gaze and continued to look at the ground eye that was dissected. It was still a ground eye stone, and its quality was decent. Inside the shaman's house, Miao's eyes were tightly shut as he covered his third eye. His face was pale. I've been discovered. Did you see Xiaoxian? Didn't I tell you not to test him again? Although the shaman's words were reproachful, his expression was worried. He quickly looked at Miao's eye again. After confirming that it was just a slight pain and nothing else, he relaxed. At night, the sun disappeared, but the sky was still bright. The silver moonlight made the ground as bright as day. Above them, a giant round plate hung high in the sky. When the two moons overlapped, the Jing tribesmen, who had been guarding the quagmire, began to walk into the quagmire. The quagmire outside the quagmire wasn't deep. Most of the adult Jing tribesmen could still breathe above the surface of the quagmire after they entered. This was calculated when they were digging the quagmire. There were even more ground eyes active in the quagmire. The Xiaoxian heard from the Jing tribesmen that the ground eyes from other places had entered the quagmire. After the full moon, most of the ground eyes in the quagmire would leave, so they had to take this opportunity to catch more. The net they threw out was traded from the drumming tribe. It was sturdier and was custom-made for catching ground eyes. The holes were smaller, so it was a type of net within a net. The more they drilled into the net, the tighter it would be. Unless there was a strong impact force that could break the net, they would be trapped in the net. Pulling the net in the quagmire required a lot of strength. Sometimes, a 5-meter-wide net would require more than 10 people to pull it together. The Yinjiao people watched on the side anxiously, but the Jing tribesmen refused to help. They had to catch the ground eyes themselves. The Xiaofan didn't watch from the outer quagmire. Instead, he went to the central quagmire. There were ripples on the surface of the quagmire. It didn't stop. Something was moving underneath. The Xiaofan heard a sound. It sounded like someone was putting a very thin straw into a cup of water and blowing at it quickly. That's the sound from the universal eye. It's only on this day that the universal eye will make such a sound. Knowing that there was a universal eye under the quagmire, the Jing shaman let out a sigh of relief. Now, even if he didn't see the true eye, he could at least catch the universal eye and comfort himself. The Jing shaman took off his coat and wrapped a few ropes around his hands. Then, he walked into the quagmire. The central quagmire was much deeper than the outer quagmires. Once a person fell in, they wouldn't be able to see him at all. However, there were some stone steps that were placed in the quagmire when it was first built. If you couldn't hold your breath anymore, you could step on the stone steps to breathe. But the steps at the bottom of the quagmire couldn't be seen by normal people. Even if you knew where they were, once you entered the quagmire, you would be in complete darkness and lose your sense of direction. It would be difficult to find the steps. In the entire Jing tribe, the only people who could accurately find the steps under the quagmire were probably the shamans of each generation. This was because they had an eye that could see through the mud. Chapter 661. The Xiaofan watched as the shaman's figure was quickly submerged by the mud after he entered the quagmire. The central quagmire didn't have the stench of mud. Even the outer quagmire had a rotten smell, but the central quagmire didn't have any other stench other than the most basic smell of mud. Even if there were plant seeds floating down here, even if those seeds could adapt to the muddy environment, there was not a single bit of green in the central quagmire. There were no plants growing here, just like a dead land. However, there were still many strange life forms active under this quagmire. It was said that the fire seed had a deterrent effect on beasts and insects, but there were always some exceptions, such as the drumming tribe's crocodiles and the Jing tribe's ground eyes. Not only were they not afraid of the fire seed, they would even gather around it. The people of the Jing tribe who were watching the shaman enter the quagmire were not worried. They believed in the shaman's abilities. The only thing they were worried about was whether the shaman could catch a universal eye. Until now, no one in the tribe had been able to catch a universal eye in the outer quagmire. As for the central quagmire, only the shaman with the highest status in the tribe and the 10 people with the most glorious achievements last year could enter. However, because of the disaster last year, the competition couldn't be held as scheduled. So this year, the shaman still had to decide who could enter. But all of this had to wait until the shaman finished his task. Right now, they could only watch from the side. Xiaofan looked up at the shaman's house not far away. Miao didn't come out, but he knew that Miao could definitely see what was happening here. Xiaofan was sure that the probing gaze from before belonged to Miao. The father and son were strange. Xiaofan knew that they must have some secrets, but that was the Jing tribesman's business. He didn't want to ask too much. He just wanted to find the true eye. The strange sound in the quagmire was sometimes strong and sometimes weak. Its position was constantly changing, and the speed was very fast. The better the stone, the harder it was to catch it. After the shaman entered the quagmire, he didn't immediately search for the universal eye. Instead, he carefully checked if the true eye was here. The true eye was harder to find than the universal eyes, and it was even harder to capture. Therefore, the shaman Jing had to focus all of his attention to investigate. Xiaofan changed his field of vision. Through the muddy water, he could see the shaman's figure moving at the bottom of the quagmire. He could also see some bright spots moving quickly. There weren't many of them, but they were all very fast. One of the bright spots was the one that made the sound. According to the brightness, Xiaofan guessed that the light spots were ground ice stones. The brighter the light spots, the higher the quality of the ground ice stones. The two brightest ones were the universal ice stones. However, one of them was silent, while the other was moving at high speed and making strange noises. Xiaofan was looking at the quagmire when he suddenly sensed something. He looked in the direction of the crystal witchcraft house. That wounded man was being dishonest again. Miao, who was secretly using his third eye to observe the situation outside, was still curious even though he had been warned twice by his father. He knew that Xiaofan would notice him, and he knew what the result would be. He couldn't help but look in Xiaofan's direction again. It was the first time he saw a shadow following behind someone. It was like another soul. He was too curious, but his father didn't allow him to ask too much. Just as he looked in Xiaofan's direction, Xiaofan also looked in his direction. Miao thought that it would be the same as before, but he quickly realized that he was wrong. Xiaofan's eyes were like two spots of light. They were completely different from the previous two times. When he looked over, he had no choice but to close his eyes. Even though he closed them, he still felt like his eyes were being burned by fire. It hurt even more than the previous two times. He almost cried out in pain, but he was worried that the people outside would hear, so he could only grit his teeth and bear with it. He was the one who brought this upon himself, so he had to endure it. Even though he had avoided Xiaofan's gaze, Miao could still feel those two eyes. They were like two pillars of fire with high temperature, trying to find out when they would come down on him. Only when Xiaofan looked away did Miao feel his body lighten. The stiffness in his muscles slowly eased, and his back was covered in sweat. "That's too scary," Miao gasped. Xiaofan's eyes weren't like this before. Why did they suddenly change? Yanjiao people didn't have a third eye, and there was nothing special about the others. It seemed that the problem lay with Xiaofan. What kind of eyes are those? While Miao was trying to figure out what was going on with Xiaofan's eyes, the crystal witchcraft shaman had finished his first lap. He stepped on the steps and popped his head out a few times. He walked around the quagmire in the middle of the circle, and finally walked out covered in mud. The crystal witchcraft shaman took a clean linen cloth from someone and wiped his eyes. Then he said to Xiaofan regretfully, "I haven't seen anything yet. I'll go down and take a look after some rest." Because they didn't find anything, the crystal witchcraft shaman didn't allow the others to go down the quagmire. He was worried that they would scare away the ground eyes that were coming over. Since the crystal witchcraft shaman had spoken, the others naturally had to listen. They had nothing to do here anyway, so they went back to the quagmire in the outer circle to continue farming. "Can I go down and try?" Xiaofan suddenly asked. The crystal witchcraft shaman, who was wiping the mud off his body, almost dropped the cloth in his hand when he heard this. "What?" the crystal witchcraft shaman asked again as if he didn't hear him clearly. Xiaofan pointed at the quagmire in front of them and said again, "Can I go down and try?" The Jing people who were still watching looked at Xiaofan as if they were looking at an idiot who wanted to die. You want to go down into the quagmire?" The crystal witchcraft shaman's face was full of disbelief. "Yes, can I?" Xiaofan looked at the crystal witchcraft shaman. In the Jing tribe, only those who had the crystal witchcraft shaman's permission could enter the quagmire. He never said that outsiders were not allowed to enter, but generally speaking, outsiders who came here would definitely not want to go down into the quagmire. The fire seed's influence was one of the reasons. It was easy for people to lose their sense of direction in the quagmire. Although the quagmire was only this big and looked like a small lake, once you really went down, you would realize that it was completely different from what you imagined. It was as if you were in a vast swamp. Even the Jing people who had a strong sense of direction lost their sense of direction after entering the quagmire. No matter how they walked, they couldn't get to their expected location, let alone an outsider who made such a request. It wasn't that the crystal witchcraft shaman couldn't agree, but he was conflicted. If something happened to Xiaofan after he went down into the quagmire, would the Yanjiao people take revenge on them? Don't worry. If it's just a matter of direction, I can solve it, Xiaofan said. If it was someone else who made this request, the crystal witchcraft shaman would definitely refuse without thinking, but the person who made this request was Xiaofan. Xiaofan just saved his son. Plus, Xiaofan was a special person, so the crystal witchcraft shaman wanted to befriend him. Miao said that people who were protected by their ancestors were always lucky. The crystal witchcraft shaman thought for a while and then nodded in agreement. The other Jing people standing on the side all turned their heads to look at the crystal witchcraft shaman, as if he had done something crazy. But when the crystal witchcraft shaman glanced at them, they all looked away. They dared to look at Xiaofan as if he was an idiot, but they didn't dare to look at the crystal witchcraft shaman that way. If you want to go down into the quagmire, you can. Although I don't know how you can find your way, just in case, you should tie a rope, the crystal witchcraft shaman suggested. Even the Jing people didn't dare to go down into the quagmire. Other than the crystal witchcraft shaman, everyone else had to tie a rope to their bodies in case they couldn't find their way down. The people at the edge of the quagmire could pull the rope to remind the people inside if they couldn't find their way down. They could also pull the person out in time if they couldn't hold it in anymore. Tie it. If you can't find your way down there, I'll pull the rope to remind you, Wei said. Tua and the others on the side nodded in agreement. After what happened in the drumming tribe, they realized that Xiaofan seemed to be able to withstand the repulsion of the fire seed from other tribes. When he was in the drumming tribe, he could move freely without being disturbed. Now that he was in the Jing tribe, where the fire seed was weaker, he wouldn't be affected at all. That was why they didn't care too much about the fire seed. But after all, they were going down into the quagmire, so the risk was still high. Although Xiaofan didn't think it was necessary, he still followed everyone's instructions and tied a rope around his body. There was nothing wrong with being cautious. Xiaofan walked down the quagmire from where the shaman pointed. There was a slope that led downward slowly. People who entered the quagmire for the first time would go down from there. If they walked down the slope, they would need some time to get used to it. After all, the quagmire was different from a normal pond. It would be easier to move around after getting used to it. After Xiaofan walked down, he realized that the further down he went, the more resistance he felt. After all, there was more water at the top of the quagmire, and more mud at the bottom. The mud was sinking down. But what was different from other quagmires was that the quagmire here was more uniform. There wasn't a clear dividing line between water and mud. The middle part of the quagmire was filled with sticky mud. It didn't have any buoyancy. It only had a force that pulled people down slowly. As he went down further, Xiaofan's entire body sank into the quagmire. He continued to walk forward until he touched the bottom of the quagmire. Then, the force stopped. There were some swimming sounds around him. Some were very soft, while others were very loud. A ground ice swished past Xiaofan not far away. Even at the bottom of the quagmire, where the mud was thicker, it could still move so quickly. No wonder it was hard to catch. Xiaofan even sensed that it had left a long hollow in the quagmire due to its fast speed. On top of the quagmire, the shaman looked at the Yanjiao people who were staring at the quagmire and asked, "Is your great elder really okay?" This question sounded like there was something wrong with our great elder's head. The Yanjiao people thought to themselves. "No problem, absolutely no problem," Wei said with a straight face. "That's close to the fire seed." The shaman could see with his third eye that Xiaofan was already walking under the quagmire. Wei turned his head to look at the shaman and said carelessly, your tribe's fire seed isn't strong." The shaman was speechless. Don't say something so offensive to the tribe. He finally understood how the two brothers Deepai and Deepa felt when they were mocked in the eye. Sigh, that's not right. The shaman suddenly realized that his worries were completely wrong. What he should be worried about now was whether or not the kid in the quagmire would attack his tribe's fire seed. How could he be so careless? The shaman felt that he had done something stupid. Chapter 662. Because Xiao Xian had saved his son, and because he was special, as a shaman of a tribe, the caution and wariness he should have as a tribe's shaman had been cast aside. He was too careless. Even if he felt that Xiao Xian wasn't that kind of person, he shouldn't have acted based on his personal opinion when it came to the fire seed. The Jing shaman fell silent. Although he didn't show it on his face, he was already starting to feel anxious. He stared straight at the quagmire. If anyone below made any strange movements, he would immediately take action. Miao, who was in the house, had already recovered. Although his vision was still blurry when he opened his eyes, it wasn't a big deal. He didn't want to be treated the same way again, but he still couldn't suppress his curiosity. If Xiao Xian hadn't entered the quagmire, he wouldn't have provoked Xiao Xian. But now that Xiao Xian had entered the quagmire, Miao also wanted to know what an outsider like him could do in the quagmire. He didn't want to be rescued when he got lost at the bottom of the quagmire. Luckily, Xiao Xian didn't look over this time. This made Miao heave a sigh of relief. Xiao Xian's eyes were too scary. At this moment, the Xiao Xian had already focused all his attention on sensing the movements around him. The Jing shaman's third eye could open normally in the quagmire, and he could see things without being disturbed by the muddy water at the bottom of the quagmire. However, the Xiao Xian couldn't. The Jing shaman's third eye was special, and he couldn't compare. The muddy water would damage the eyes, so after being dragged to the bottom of the quagmire, the Xiao Xian kept his eyes closed. Luckily, with his special vision, even with his eyes closed, the Xiao Xian could still see the situation around him through his eyelids. This was something the others didn't know. After sinking to the bottom of the quagmire, the Xiao Xian didn't immediately move. Instead, he stood quietly on the spot and observed the situation around him. Under the quagmire, the pressure from the muddy water around him was at least twice as much as that of a normal river or lake. Moreover, this was the pressure he felt when he was still. If he wanted to lift his feet and walk under the quagmire, he would need to expend even more energy. This was also why the shaman was so tired that he had to come ashore to rest after only taking a slow walk under the quagmire. In Xiao Xian's vision, the ground eyes around him were glowing dots of light. Some were bright, some were dark. They were all ground eyes, and those glowing dots were actually the ground eye stones inside the ground eyes' bodies. In Xiao Xian's vision, ordinary ground eye stones were dull gray. Only high-quality ground eye stones and universal eyes were brighter, especially the universal eyes, which were especially bright. When the universal eye passed by Xiao Xian, it left behind a trail of light in Xiao Xian's vision. Based on this pattern, Xiao Xian only needed to search for the brightest spot. Xiao Xian didn't know how the true eye looked like, but he knew how bright the universal eyes were. What he needed to do now was to search for a spot in the quagmire that was brighter than the two universal eyes from before. Then, he needed to catch it. Although he didn't know if the true eye could be used on Caesar, he still had to try. Caesar still followed the hunting team out to hunt in the tribe, but his mobility was still lacking compared to before. Especially in the forest full of danger and fierce beasts, his mobility was greatly restricted. Every time old Ku saw Caesar's injuries, he wondered if he should let Caesar change professions. For example, pulling carts at the Flaming River trading point. Unfortunately, Caesar wasn't willing. Pulling carts was just a part-time job. He liked to hunt more. Now that he was hungry, he would go out to the forest to look for food. He even brought food for old Ku. If he could give that guy an eye, even if he couldn't recover to his peak condition, as long as he was better than now, it would be worth Xiaoxian's visit. Beside the quagmire, everyone saw that after Xiaoxian went down, he didn't move. The rope tied to Xiaoxian's body also stopped moving. Could he be trapped by the mud at the bottom of the quagmire? Is that why he can't move? Someone whispered. Bullshit, how strong can the mud in the quagmire be? It's impossible to trap us Yanjiao tribesmen. He's just walking around in the quagmire. How could such a small thing trouble our grand elder? Duo Li refuted without hesitation. But they didn't understand why Xiaoxian didn't move after he went down either. Hey, it's moving. It's moving, someone suddenly shouted. Everyone looked over. The rope tied to Xiaoxian's body was indeed moving. This meant that Xiaoxian was starting to walk around in the quagmire. It also proved that what Duo Li said was true. Although the Jing tribesmen didn't say anything, they didn't agree with Duo Li's words. Just walking around in the quagmire? Such a small thing? If it was that simple, then the Jing tribesmen wouldn't have so many restrictions on the central quagmire. Others didn't know, but many of the Jing elders knew. When the central quagmire was first dug, it was used as a second line of defense for the Jing tribe. If there was any danger, the Jing tribesmen would retreat into the central quagmire to seek refuge. This quagmire had swallowed countless beasts. However, the beasts that were swallowed into the quagmire had already become a part of it. Not even their bones were left behind. Xiaoxian also realized that after he sank to the bottom of the quagmire, his originally sharp sense of direction seemed to have been blocked. If it weren't for his special vision that allowed him to see the traps at the bottom of the quagmire, Xiaoxian might have really gotten lost in the quagmire. He had been standing at the bottom of the quagmire for a while now, so he got used to the pressure and resistance. He also had a basic understanding of the environment, but now Xiaoxian needed some fresh air, so he walked towards the stairs at the bottom of the quagmire. There were stairs made of stones at the bottom of the quagmire. After he stepped on them, he would be able to emerge from the quagmire. The Jing shaman, who was standing outside the quagmire, originally wanted to tell the Yanjiao people where to pull the rope to remind Xiaoxian. However, he saw the rope tied to Xiaoxian move towards the stairs before the Yanjiao people pulled it. Seeing this, the Jing shaman couldn't help but open his 3 eyes wide. He looked at the bottom of the quagmire again and saw Xiaoxian walking towards the stairs. He didn't have any intention to test it out. His footsteps were steady, as if he was sure there were stairs there. How was this possible? The Jing shaman couldn't understand. Xiaoxian didn't have a third eye, so how did he find the stairs so accurately? Before Xiaoxian entered the quagmire, he had pointed out the stairs to Xiaoxian, but everyone in the Jing tribe knew that even if they could clearly identify the place outside the quagmire, once they entered the quagmire, it was as if their memories were messed up, and they kept going in the wrong direction. Seeing Xiaoxian's head emerge from the quagmire, the Yanjiao people let out a sigh of relief. Wei and the others, whose faces were tense, also smiled. Duo Li looked proudly at the Jing people who were watching. His eyes seemed to be telling them, "Did you see that? I wasn't lying, right?" Xiaoxian raised his hand to wipe the mud off his face. He said to Wei and the others, "Throw me a rope. I'll tie my hands." The Jing shaman looked at Xiaoxian in surprise. "You want to catch it yourself?" "Yes, there was a universal eye that passed by me just now. It was the one that made the sound. If I can't find the true eye, I'll catch a universal eye first." Xiaoxian caught the rope that was thrown over. This was what the Jing people often used to tie their hands. After tying the rope around their hands, even if the ground eye spun very fast, with the rope's protection, they wouldn't hurt their hands directly. This rope was used as a glove. The Jing shaman opened his mouth. He wasn't sad that the Xiaoxian had taken the universal eye. He promised to let Xiaofan go down, so he didn't care much about the universal eyes in the quagmire. What he was surprised about was that Xiaofan didn't lose his sense of direction at the bottom of the quagmire. Not only could he walk freely, but he also planned to catch the universal eyes. "Alright, be careful." The Jing shaman didn't say anything else. He felt that Xiaofan only found the universal eye because of its sound. If that was the case, then he could continue to sit by the quagmire and watch the show. If Xiaofan caught the universal eye, then even if he couldn't find the true eye, he wouldn't be angry. It was better to have something than nothing. If Xiaofan couldn't catch the universal eye, then he would catch it for Xiaofan after he rested for a while. The more the Jing shaman thought about it, the more he felt that this was a good thing. He continued to sit by the side and watched as Xiaofan took a deep breath and sank into the quagmire again. As for the true eye, in the Jing shaman's opinion, Xiaofan definitely wouldn't be able to catch it. Even if there was a true eye next to Xiaofan, he wouldn't be able to find it. A true eye wouldn't make that kind of sound. He still had to rely on the Jing tribe. After confirming that Xiaofan wasn't in any trouble, the Yanjiao people started joking around. They even chatted with the Jing people about who had the highest chance of getting first place this year. While they were chatting, they didn't forget to promote the Flaming River trading point. They told them that if they needed food or animal hides in the future, they could go there and trade with ground eye stones. Xiaofan, who was at the bottom of the quagmire, had already started to follow the Jing shaman's footsteps and walk along the quagmire. As the Jing shaman, he was naturally more experienced. Xiaofan walked along the Jing shaman's path. It was probably the safest and least likely route to miss the target. The mud at the bottom of the quagmire made Xiaofan feel like he was walking against the wind. Even if he stopped, he wouldn't be blown away. If he was tired, he could still rest. It was just that he couldn't breathe fresh air, so he felt a little suffocated. Every once in a while, he would have to find a platform to breathe. The full moon was in the sky. As Xiaofan walked around the quagmire, he realized that there were more and more ground eyes in the middle of the quagmire. Some ground eyes crawled out from the walls of the quagmire, while others crawled out from under the carpet. On the ground eyes from other places were gathering here. The Jing fire seed was especially attractive to them on this day. They were like moths attracted to a flame in the dark night, rushing towards the Jing fire seed. That was why in Xiaofan's vision, there were more and more light spots. There was one more universal eye. The night was still long, so there might be more universal eyes crawling out. The Jing shaman said that tonight was the most active night of the year for ground eyes. He just didn't know if he would be able to see a true eye. The Jing shaman opened his third eye wide. When he saw Xiaofan walk past a universal eye floating in the quagmire, he couldn't help but smile. Sure enough, that kid was just judging by the sound. But then, the policeman saw the universal eye that was spinning rapidly in the quagmire. It walked past Xiaofan several times, but Xiaofan didn't move at all. The Jing shaman was puzzled. If it happened once or twice, he could say that the kid didn't react in time. But 3, 4, 5 times? What was that kid thinking? Chapter 663. Xiaofan walked at the bottom of the quagmire. His speed wasn't fast, but it was the same as when the shaman was at the bottom of the quagmire. He did plan to catch a universal eye if he couldn't find a true eye. That way, his trip to the bottom of the quagmire wouldn't be in vain. But when he walked at the bottom of the quagmire, he suddenly felt like he was being watched by someone. It was as if someone was watching his movements in the dark. This attention wasn't from Miao or the shaman. Xiaofan could tell that these two people were watching him. He could even feel that Miao and the shaman were watching him, but this third gaze wasn't from above. It was from the bottom of the quagmire. Xiaofan peered through his eyelids and looked around him. There were more and more spots of light. Just in the area around him, there were no less than 20 ground eyes. However, most of them weren't bright enough to meet Xiaoxian's requirements. These ground eyes were at most high-quality ground eye stones. They didn't even have a universal eye. Xiaoxian couldn't see the entire quagmire. It wasn't big, but it wasn't small either. It wasn't big because it was small compared to some large natural lakes. It wasn't small because it was man-made. It was almost twice as big as the man-made lake at the foot of Yanjiao's main mountain. This was also why the Jing tribe had a large area but little land. The quagmire took up too much of the land. The further it was from Xiaoxian, the blurrier the spots of light became. In other words, even if there was a brighter spot of light, if it was too far away from Xiaoxian wouldn't be able to tell what kind of ground eye it was. It was just like looking at the stars at night. A dimmer star didn't mean it wasn't bright. It was just a matter of distance. Ground eyes weren't slow when swimming in the quagmire. The higher the level of the ground eye, the faster it could swim. Ground eyes were a special kind of animal. They could also sense the presence of humans. When Xiaoxian was walking, many of them noticed Xiaoxian. Some would quickly avoid him, while others ignored him. But these gazes didn't give Xiaoxian a strong feeling. It was far less intense than the one in the dark. There was no murderous intent, no aggression, and no emotions. In the Jing quagmire, other than the ground eyes, there weren't any other dangerous beasts that could attack. Xiaoxian was guessing. If the gaze in the quagmire came from a ground eye, what level was it? He had already felt the universal eye, and it was even stronger than the universal eye. Was it a true ground eye? If it's a ground eye, why didn't he see it? Maybe he couldn't see its spot. Thinking up to this point, Xiaoxian looked in the direction of the gaze. The source of the gaze changed according to Xiaoxian's movements. Every time Xiaoxian was about to get close, it would quickly run away and maintain a certain distance from Xiaoxian. Within this distance, it wasn't easy for Xiaoxian to see what it really was. After tracking it a few times, Xiaoxian only locked onto one spot. But because of the distance, Xiaoxian didn't know how bright it was. He could only compare it to the other ground eyes and estimate that it was at least at the level of the universal eye. But because there were more and more light spots in the quagmire, it was easy for people to overlook it. Xiaoxian continued to chase after the light spot. If he lost it, he would rely on his intuition to determine the source of the gaze. After walking around the quagmire, Xiaoxian stepped on the steps at the bottom of the quagmire and popped his head up to breathe. After the suffocating feeling in his chest disappeared, Xiaoxian said to Wei and the others who were following him around the quagmire, "Later on, I might run a little too fast. You can loosen the rope." Although they didn't understand what Xiaoxian meant by running a little too fast, Wei and the others still loosened the rope. Normally, when the Jing people went into the quagmire, one end of the rope would be tied to the person going into the quagmire, and the other end would be tied to a wooden stake. The wooden stake was deeply embedded in the quagmire, and the part that was exposed above the ground was about 6 meters long. The other end of the rope was a third above the stake, and there was a basket on top of the stake. In the basket, there was a large coil of straw rope. There were a total of 10 wooden stakes like this, and they were distributed in 10 different directions around the quagmire. In the past, when people went into the quagmire, they would only move in one direction. If they went beyond the designated area, the rope would easily get tangled at the bottom of the quagmire if there were too many people. After all, in the entire Jing tribe, other than the people with the third eye, everyone else had to rely on the rope to move. If the rope got tangled up, they would have a lot of trouble too. But now, only the Xiaoxian was going into the quagmire. The reason why he could move freely at the bottom of the quagmire was because the rope on his body wasn't fixed. Wei and the others were holding it, so when Xiaoxian moved at the bottom of the quagmire, they would follow him. Now, Xiaofan told Wei and the others to stop holding the rope. He also untied the rope on his body. If he ran around the quagmire, the rope might tie him up. The center of the quagmire was solid ground, just like an island in the middle of a lake. The center of the quagmire was piled up with rocks. That was where the Jing tribe's fire pit was located. When the Jing people encountered danger, they would go there to take refuge. So if the rope was tied up, Xiaofan would be hindered if he wanted to chase after his target. Since they were sure that Xiaofan wouldn't have a problem moving around at the bottom of the quagmire, the Yanjiao people didn't have to worry too much even if they untied the rope. They were even guessing if Xiaofan could catch a universal eye. The Jing shaman, who was sitting in the same spot and watching the show, finally stood up. Because he was sitting in the same spot, he didn't see Xiaofan's movements clearly. But he felt that Xiaofan must have found something, or in other words, Xiaofan already had a target. Was it that universal eye? No, it wasn't. The direction that Xiaofan was chasing after the universal eye was very far away from it. The direction wasn't right, so it couldn't be that universal eye. Then, did Xiaofan find another universal eye? That wasn't right either. From what he saw just now, Xiaofan also missed the other universal eyes. What was Xiaofan chasing after? Because he didn't understand, the Jing shaman couldn't sit still anymore. He wanted to follow and see. Seeing the Jing shaman stand up, and hearing that the Yanjiao person was about to start catching ground eyes, the Jing people immediately became interested. They all followed behind the Jing shaman, wanting to see if that Yanjiao person could successfully catch the ground eyes. After Xiaofan took a few deep breaths, he sank to the bottom of the quagmire. This time, without the rope pulling him, he didn't have to worry about going to the center of the quagmire, so he sped up. The night was getting darker. Outside the quagmire, it was as bright as day because of the moon. Everything on the ground could be seen clearly. More and more ground eyes appeared in the quagmire. The bright moon hung high in the sky, and they all seemed very excited. The people standing by the quagmire could see some ground eyes jumping out of the water. Because of their fast spinning bodies, they threw mud onto the shore. Many people were splashed with bits of mud. It would be great if we had a net with a long handle, Duo Li said. We have nets, but without the Jing shaman's permission, no one in the Jing tribe dares to do anything. Tua pointed at the Jing people behind him with his mouth. Duo Li looked over. As expected, many Jing people were eager to try, but they didn't dare to move without permission. Even if you have a net with a long handle, you won't be able to catch them. They're too fast, Wei said. The ground eyes that jumped out of the quagmire didn't jump high, but they were fast. They almost all disappeared in a flash, leaving behind splashes of mud. Duo Li and the others were about to say something, but Wei suddenly said, "Stop talking, follow them." On the other side, the Jing shaman had already started running. It was obvious that the people at the bottom of the quagmire had also started moving. They couldn't see what was going on under the quagmire. After the Xiaofan went down, they couldn't even sense the Xiaofan's aura. If they were on the shore, they could only determine the Xiaofan's position based on the movements of the Jing shaman. Therefore, these people who couldn't see what was going on under the quagmire could only follow the shaman. Soon, there were obvious movements in the quagmire. This was because the people at the bottom of the quagmire were moving quickly, causing the mud to move with them. Running in the quagmire wasn't as convenient as running on the ground. Sometimes, it even felt a little powerless. It wasn't as effective as running on the ground. However, after running one lap around the quagmire, the Xiaofan also got the hang of it. He started to speed up from the second lap. Outside the quagmire, the Yanjiao people and the Jing people followed the Jing shaman and ran one lap around the quagmire. Then the second lap, the third lap, the eye between the Jing shaman's eyebrows was wide open, as if he was staring at something with all his might. The veins on his forehead bulged because he was staring too hard. The expression on his face became more and more complicated, more and more conflicted. After running the fourth lap around the quagmire with the shaman, some people couldn't hold it in anymore, especially the Yanjiao people. They looked at the Jing shaman with resentment. Three-eyed shaman, at least explain something. Can't you use your third eye to see what's going on under the quagmire? Can't you say something more? Why are you frowning and pretending to be deep? If the Jing shaman knew what everyone was thinking, he would definitely cry out for injustice. Because he couldn't understand what Xiaoxian was chasing. He could only see that Xiaoxian was chasing after something, but he couldn't tell what it was. There were indeed many ground eyes in the direction that Xiaoxian was chasing, but most of them were just ground eyes that contained ground eye stones. The Jing shaman thought that Xiaoxian would attack the universal eyes that were very close to him, but Xiaoxian ran in another direction, completely ignoring the universal eyes that were making noise. What was it? What was he chasing? Was there something that he couldn't see with his third eye? The Jing shaman was puzzled. It shouldn't be. While the Jing shaman was in a dilemma, in the Jing shaman's house, Miao also opened his third eye and looked at the quagmire. He couldn't go out and run, so he couldn't see everything. In the beginning, Miao was the same as the Jing shaman. He didn't understand what Xiaoxian was chasing, but after the second and third lap, Miao's face became more and more confused. He saw what Xiaoxian was chasing, but he wasn't sure what it was. Chapter 664. At the bottom of the swamp, Xiaoxian stared at the light spot. His totemic power surged crazily, and the muscles in his legs suddenly expanded. His body sank as he bent his legs, and then he rushed out quickly. His whole body was like a loach swimming in the mud at high speed, sliding towards his target. The mud in the quagmire vibrated and surged up. The people outside the quagmire could only see that the quagmire was constantly surging as if it was boiling, emitting a gurgling sound. The shaman, who could see Xiaoxian's movements at the bottom of the quagmire with his third eye, saw this scene and his face twitched. He had never seen anyone run like this in the quagmire. The quagmire was not like the ground. Although there was a pulling force in the quagmire that pulled people to the bottom, it was still not as convenient as on the ground. Even when he rushed out, there was still a delay in his descent. This was something that could not be changed. Because Xiaoxian knew this, he did not run in the quagmire. Instead, he leapt and sprinted. Every time he leapt, he would bend his leg to land on the bottom of the quagmire. Then, he would use the momentum to propel himself forward at high speed. Every time he leapt, he would cover a distance of more than 10 meters. As Xiaoxian familiarized himself with this method, he became even faster. 10 meters, 15 meters, 20 meters, every time he rushed out, the distance he covered in the mud would increase. The quagmire churned more and more violently with Xiaoxian's movements at the bottom of the quagmire. The shaman, who was still running at the edge of the quagmire, was sweating profusely. He really did not know how that kid could run so fast in the quagmire. He was like a fish in the water. If one only looked at Xiaoxian's movements, they would not think that he was moving in a quagmire. Moreover, it was close to the fire seat of a foreign tribe. His movements did not seem to be affected at all. This was unbelievable. When the shaman agreed to let Xiaoxian go down, he never thought that he would encounter such a situation. He thought that the kid was just curious and wanted to take a walk in the quagmire. The current situation was completely out of his expectations. Looking at how fast the kid was chasing, it was impossible for him to get to the shore. The Jing shaman quickly wiped the sweat off his forehead and continued to run. Even though he was tired of running, he was more conflicted than anything else. What was that brat chasing after? He couldn't tell, he still couldn't tell. At this time, Xiaoxian's every step caused the thick mud at the bottom of the swamp to vibrate violently. Many ground eyes no longer stayed at the bottom of the swamp in order to avoid the vibrations, and instead swam to the surface of the swamp. As a result, the people standing outside the quagmire noticed that more and more ground eyes were surging out of the water. Dong! With a muffled sound, the mud in the quagmire began to churn again as if someone was stirring it. The surface of the muddy water became even more turbid and viscous as it surged in one direction. Dong! 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 Muffled sounds rang out one after another. Every sound was the sound of Xiaofan taking a step forward. They were all produced when he stepped on the bottom of the pool. On the other side of the quagmire outside the Jing tribe, Dipai and Dipa of the Ya tribe had just run over to watch the Jing people catch the ground eyes when they heard the sounds coming from the center of the quagmire. Dipai and Dipa looked away from the people who were busy catching the ground eyes. Their ears twitched along with the vibrations coming from the ground. They tried to distinguish the source of the sound and the exact location of the vibrations. It wasn't coming from the ground? Who was it? This sound didn't sound like something the Jing people could make. The Jing people didn't have that much strength. The two of them were confused, but they still walked towards the center of the quagmire. Because the Jing people were very familiar with the Dipai and Dipa brothers, they didn't stop them when they saw them walking towards the center of the quagmire. However, the two brothers didn't get too close to the quagmire. The Jing fire seed's repulsion made them feel very uncomfortable. The closer they got, the more uncomfortable they felt. That was why they only stopped when they got a little closer to the quagmire. They squinted their eyes, trying to see what was going on over there. Unfortunately, their vision wasn't good enough, so they could only guess what was going on over there from the sounds. There are Yanjiao people over there. What are they doing? They could only feel a group of Yanjiao people and a group of Jing people running around the quagmire like idiots. They didn't know what they were doing, but the quagmire was also very noisy. What's down there? The Dipai and Dipa brothers put their ears to the ground and felt the vibrations coming from the ground. Every time there was a vibration, their ears would twitch quickly. The beards and hair on their faces would spread out like needles, sensing every tiny vibration in the air and ground. In the quagmire, the Xiaofan stepped on the stairs again and popped his head out to take a breath. This time, the Jing shaman took the opportunity and asked, "What did you see?" "There's a ground eye. I feel like it's looking at me." "You said it before, the true eye is like an eye. It gives people a different feeling from other ground eyes." Before the Xiaofan could finish, the Jing shaman interrupted him, "It can't be the true eye. If it was the true eye, he would have seen it a long time ago. There was no way he couldn't see it until now. You can't even see the true eye. Do you think I'm blind? Do you think I'm from the Ya tribe?" The Jing shaman didn't believe the Xiaofan. If there was a true eye, it wouldn't be able to escape his third eye. The Xiaofan didn't care and continued, "You also said that the higher the level of the ground eye, the faster it can move in the quagmire. That ground eye is faster than the universal eye." "Impossible." The Jing shaman denied again. He didn't see a single ground eye moving quickly in the quagmire. Not to mention the universal eye, he didn't even see a normal ground eye. There were so many ground eyes in the quagmire. If there was one moving at high speed, how could he miss it? Just as he was about to say something, the Jing shaman suddenly heard a low cough from the house. This place wasn't far from the house. The Jing shaman remembered that Miao was still in the house. He must have seen what happened just now, but why did he cough like that? Ever since Miao's injuries recovered, he never coughed again. Did Miao discover something and wanted to remind him? Because of Miao's low cough, the Jing shaman swallowed the words he was about to say. He changed the topic and said, "If it really is the true eye, you won't be able to catch it. Only I can catch it." The Jing shaman pointed at his third eye. Catching the true eye is actually a competition of eyes. Even in the past, when the Jing people caught the true eye, it was with the help of the shaman. You can't do it. Even if you use a net, you won't be able to catch the true eye. You can't compete with it in terms of speed. How about this? Let me rest for a while, then I'll go down and catch it with you. The Xiaofan thought for a while and nodded. Then you rest first. I'll try again. If it doesn't work, then we'll discuss how to work together. The Jing shaman wanted to go to the house and ask Miao what he found, but the Xiaofan had already sunk to the bottom of the quagmire. The Jing shaman could only look at the quagmire again. This time, he wanted to take a good look at the ground eye moving quickly in the quagmire. When the Xiaofan sank to the bottom of the quagmire, the ground eye was quietly watching him from afar, but the Jing shaman couldn't see it. The Xiaofan thought about the few times he chased the ground eye. The quagmire didn't pose much of a hindrance to the ground eye. Instead, it helped them move faster in the quagmire. Every time, he almost caught up with the ground eye, but the distance between them was enough for the ground eye to widen again. After all, the ground eyes that lived underground and in the quagmire didn't need to come out of the water to breathe, but the Xiaofan needed to. Even though totemic warriors could hold their breath for longer than normal people, the intense consumption of energy would shorten this time. The Jing shaman couldn't see it, but the Xiaofan had been chasing it for so long. In fact, he was 80% sure that it was the ground eye. The Jing shaman had said that it wasn't easy for the true eye to appear. If he was wrong, he might have to wait even longer. Naturally, the Xiaofan wouldn't let go of this opportunity so easily. Even if it was proven that it wasn't the true eye, the Xiaofan still wanted to try. It was better than missing it and regretting it later. Using a net wouldn't work, and speed wouldn't work either. Then, he changed his method. The Jing shaman saw that the Xiaofan was using the same method again to chase in a certain direction. He quickly opened his eyes wide and looked in that direction. He couldn't help but stand up and follow in that direction. While he was looking for his target with his eyes wide open, the Jing shaman was still complaining in his heart. It was the same old trick again. Even if there really was the true eye, using this method wouldn't work. It would just be a waste of energy. The muffled thumping sounds came from the bottom of the pool, and the quagmire surged again. The people who saw this were the same as the Jing shaman. They thought that what happened next would be the same as before, but they soon realized that they were wrong. The Xiaofan was indeed using the leaping method to chase, but as he got closer and closer to the light spot, he was about to reach the surface of the pool to take a breath. Every time he was the closest to the target, he would suddenly rush towards the stairs at the bottom of the pool. His leg, which had accumulated power, kicked hard at the bottom of the pool, making a thumping sound. His body broke through the mud and pushed forward. When he reached the stairs, his other leg landed on the stairs. However, just as the Jing shaman thought that Xiaofan was going to step on the stairs to take a breath, the Xiaofan didn't stop. Instead, he suddenly stepped on the stairs. Thump! Another muffled sound rang out. It was even more muffled than the previous few times, like a heavy hammer hitting the ground. Everyone who heard this sound felt their hearts tremble. At the bottom of the pool, the stone stairs at the bottom of the pool that Xiaofan had stepped on sank. Large amounts of mud rose up from the vibrations. Xiaofan's rapidly advancing figure was like a battle knife cutting through the mud. A series of bubbles appeared behind him because he was moving too quickly, making popping sounds. However, Xiaofan didn't rush towards the target like before. Although he was still facing the target, his body was slanted upwards. At the same time, he raised his arm, clenched his fist, and swung his arm. The moment his head emerged from the mud, Xiaofan's raised arm brought up the mud in the quagmire. It was like the dorsal fin of a ferocious shark in the sea. The Jing shaman's eyelids twitched. He had a feeling that something bad was going to happen. Thump! Xiao Xian's raised arm turned into a heavy hammer at this moment, and slammed it onto the surface of the pool. A powerful force instantly broke open the surface of the pool. Where Xiao Xian's arm landed, the vibration split the water and broke the waves. The mud was pushed away, and ripples spread in all directions, forming a rapidly expanding depression. The mud was like a blooming black lotus, tumbling and exploding. The mud at the bottom of the pool was sent flying by the vibrations, splashing out of the surface of the pool. Many of the ground eyes that were swimming on the surface of the quagmire were also blown out of the water. The wet mud was flung out by the ground eyes that were sent flying, sweeping towards the shore like raindrops. Chapter 665. The sudden loud noise not only scared the people who were staring at the quagmire, but the two brothers, Di Pai and Di Pa, who were originally sticking close to the ground to listen to the noise, were so scared that they jumped up. Their short and fat bodies rolled back a few times before they stopped. After they stopped, their first reaction was to dig a hole and bury themselves underground. Scary. Too scary. They just wanted to watch the show. How could they encounter something so scary? The two brothers of the Ya tribe were completely shocked by the vibrations and sounds coming from the ground and air. Although they didn't know what happened, this kind of noise was enough to scare them. It was better to dig a hole and bury themselves underground. Hiding underground was safer than on the surface. Beside the quagmire, the black waves of mud crashed down on the people who were already stunned on the shore. The water splashed onto them, and the mud rushed into their open mouths. The Jing people looked at the huge hole in the quagmire. It was as if a large piece of the quagmire was suddenly dug out by a big spoon. Violent. Too violent. Although the mud around the hole quickly filled up the hole after it stopped expanding, the Jing people who were watching from the side were still traumatized by this scene. From now on, the Jing people's impression of the Yanjiao people would probably stop at the scene where a Yanjiao person created a huge hole in their central quagmire. The active ground eyes in the quagmire were thrown into the air by the waves of mud, and then they all fell back into the quagmire. Before one of the ground eyes fell into the quagmire, a hand suddenly reached out from the quagmire and caught the falling ground eye. The moment it was caught, the ground eye was still spinning. The straw rope tied to the hand squeezed off the mud as it spun. It even created sparks as if it was burning. But in the next moment, the hand and the ground eye both fell into the quagmire. The sparks created by the friction between the hand and the ground eye were extinguished in the mud. The splashing sound of the mud gradually subsided. The ground eyes that were supposed to be active tonight suddenly calmed down. No one knew if it was because they were scared or because they fainted from the impact just now. Under the silver plate hanging high in the sky, the moonlight illuminated everything on the ground very clearly. After everything stopped, the mud in the quagmire stopped churning violently. What happened? The confused crowd looked at the shaman and saw that the shaman was looking in one direction. That was where Xiao Xian had entered the quagmire. There was a gentle slope that extended downwards from the shore. Xiao Xian had walked down from there. Whoosh whoosh, the sound of water came from the quagmire. The surface of the quagmire that had just settled down rippled. Obviously, someone was approaching from below. A man covered in mud poked his head out of the water. That Yanjiao guy is coming out. What did he do just now? Look at his hand. As Xiao Xian slowly walked out of the slope, half of his body emerged from the quagmire. His hands were hanging by his side, one of them holding a shuttle-shaped object. It's a ground eye. What kind of ground eye is that? It's quite big, but I can't tell what kind it is. Even the experienced Jing people couldn't come to a definite conclusion. They just stared at the ground eye in Xiao Xian's hand, then looked at the shaman, waiting for his evaluation. The shaman's face was frozen. Just now, Xiao Xian had created a big hole in the quagmire. His heart was still beating violently. When he grabbed the ground eye just now, he almost thought that Xiaofan was going to destroy their fire seed. Before he could shout, "Stop!" the quagmire returned to normal. Seeing that Xiaofan didn't do anything else and seemed like he was going to come out of the quagmire, the shaman let out a sigh of relief. But when he saw Xiaofan walk out of the quagmire, his sigh was stuck in his throat again. The shaman's 3 eyes stared at the ground eye in Xiaofan's hand. To be honest, there was nothing special about this ground eye. He had caught a lot of special-looking ground eyes in his years as a shaman, but this one made him react so strongly because he didn't see it with his 3rd eye before it came out of the quagmire. The shaman saw Xiaofan walking, but he didn't see what Xiaofan was holding until the ground eye appeared as Xiaofan walked out of the quagmire. Shock, disbelief. The shaman even suspected that there was something wrong with his 3rd eye. How could he not see it? Thinking back to what Xiaofan said before, he thought that the ground eye that was faster than the universal eyes must be this one. Could it be that he was really blind? He must have been infected by the people. The shaman started doubting himself. Until now, he still couldn't see what was different about this ground eye. Miao, who was originally in the house, was helped out. He also wanted to see if the ground eye Xiaofan caught was the true eye. Grand Elder, what kind of ground eye did you catch? Kun too and the others surrounded them. I think it has to be at least the universal eyes. Tuo said. Brother Xian, hurry up and cut it open. Guang and Duo Li urged him. Xiaofan didn't have the experience, so he walked in front of the shaman and said, "Please cut it open and see if it's the true eye." Oh. The Jing shaman snapped out of his self-doubt and asked someone to fetch some tools from the house. He also asked someone to fetch a basin of water. He carefully took the ground eye that Xiaofan passed to him. The moment he turned his hand, the ground eye suddenly started spinning again. Luckily, the shaman was experienced. He grabbed it tightly with the rope wrapped around his hand and didn't give it a chance to escape. This kind of spinning was stronger than the universal eyes. The shaman felt the strength in his hand and his heart started to move towards Xiaofan's guess. The knife used to cut open ground eyes was made from animal horns. It was definitely not as sharp as the weapons in Xiaofan's hands, but the Jing people had been using their own tools for a long time and were used to it. Plus, this knife was specially made for cutting open ground eyes. It could be cut along the threads on the ground eye's shell, so the shaman didn't take the knife Xiaofan passed to him. He washed the ground eye in clean water. After washing it, the ground eye was no longer covered in mud, so it started spinning much slower. The shaman held the ground eye in one hand and the knife in the other. He measured the ground eye's body with the knife, then cut into the middle of the ground eye. The shaman used a lot of strength and his movements were fast. With one cut, a small crack appeared near the center of the ground eye. With the second cut, he could see the white meat inside. Compared to the gray outer shell, the meat inside the ground eye was unbelievably white. Under the moonlight, it shone brightly. After the second cut, the shaman took a deep breath. The people around him also became nervous. The third cut would reveal the truth. Whether it was the ground eye stone, the universal eyes, or the true eye that Xiaofan had been longing for, there would be an answer. The Xiaofan stared at the knife in the shaman's hand without blinking. With the third cut, the white meat was cut open, revealing the core of the ground eye. Huh! The shaman's hand paused. The Xiaofan looked over. In the meat that was cut open, there was no round bead. No matter what kind of ground eye stone it was definitely not the color of the ground eye meat. However, there was no ground eye stone. Instead, there was a small round ball wrapped in white ground eye meat. The ground eye meat wrapped around the ball showed signs of hardening, so it was not cut open by the shaman's third cut. What is this? The shaman had never seen anything like this before. He frowned and looked at the Xiaofan. Continue? Continue. Cut it open and see what's inside, the Xiaofan said. When they were at the bottom of the quagmire, it was the wrapped bead that had shown. The shaman was even more careful this time. He cut open the hard meat wrapped around the ball bit by bit until a trace of black was revealed. True eye. The shaman almost shouted. He could only see it now. It was as if the meat wrapped around the ground eye stone had blocked the vision of his third eye, so he could not see the true face of the ground eye. The moment the shaman spoke, the onlookers burst into an uproar. It's the true eye. The shaman said it's the true eye. I can't believe he actually caught it. The people who were catching ground eyes in the outer quagmire heard the shouts. They put down what they were doing and ran over. It was rare to hear about someone catching a true eye. Sometimes, it might not even be seen for a few years. Of course, they had to take a good look. Seeing that more and more people were gathering around, the shaman waved his hand impatiently to chase them away. He thought of something and said 10 names. It's you guys this year. You can enter the quagmire in the center tonight to catch ground eyes. The 10 people who were named were overjoyed. They were not in a hurry to look at the true eye. They hurried back to prepare their equipment for the quagmire. Who knew, they might be able to catch something good? The shaman asked the Xiaofan to go to the house to talk. It was too noisy here. When he went over, the shaman was still thinking about how such a situation could happen. However, with Mio's previous example, the shaman quickly calmed down. It should not be a problem with his eyes. There were too many types of true eyes. Perhaps he could only see a part of it. After entering the house, the shaman continued to dissect the ground eye that he had not finished dissecting. The true eye that he dissected was a pure black bead. It did not have the pupil like the ground eye stone, nor did it have the pointing function of the universal eye. It looked just like a black stone. This is the true eye, the Xiaofan asked. It looked too normal and too small. The universal eye and the ground eye stone were at least the size of a quail egg. The one in front of him was not even a third of the size of the other two. Not bad. Why? Don't you think it looks like it? You'll know when it's time to merge. The shaman inspected the true eye that he had dissected and put it back into the ground eye meat. He then closed the outer shell of the ground eye and tied it with a rope to prevent the meat inside from showing through the cracks. After tying it up, the shaman put it into a large bamboo tube filled with mud. It will last longer if you put it in here. However, I still advise you to use it as much as possible. If you drag it out for too long, it will affect the merging process, the shaman said. The Xiaofan agreed. He would have more chances in the future, but if he missed out on Caesar's eye this time, he did not know when he would have another chance. After all, the shaman said that it was hard to find a true eye. If the ground eye was not active during normal times, even a universal eye would be hard to find. Even if the ground eye was preserved using the Jing tribe's method, the temperature was too high right now. He did not know how long it would last. It was better to go back as soon as possible. The Xiaofan asked the shaman about some things he needed to pay attention to, such as how to install the true eye on a human or beast that had lost an eye, and whether he needed any medicine to help. You don't need anything else. Just feed the ground eye meat to it. It might help with the merging process. Speaking of which, I only made a small opening between my eyebrows and put the true eye there, and it merged. Speaking of this, the shaman was quite proud. He was one of the few people who managed to merge successfully. He was very talented. However, some people have a strong reaction. You can do whatever you want. If that person, that wolf has a strong reaction or even bleeds too much, stop the merging process. Even if you put the true eye in, you have to dig it out. The shaman looked at the Xiaofan seriously and reminded him again, some things cannot be forced. I understand, the Xiaofan said seriously. Chapter 666. The Xiaofan recorded everything the shaman said he needed to pay attention to. Installing an eye was different from other things, so he couldn't miss out on any details. The shaman was patient too. He told Xiaofan everything he could. If it was related to the Jing tribe's secrets, he was even more vague. The Xiaofan already knew that the shaman was different from the other Jing people. His way of thinking was different from the traditional Jing people, but he did it for the sake of the Jing tribe. He could use this information to exchange for more things with the Xiaofan. Looking out of the window, the central quagmire was bustling with noise and excitement. There were many people watching. Although only 10 people went into the quagmire, there were many people helping. Some were cheering, and some were just watching. Most of the people from the tribe were gathered here. There were also the tribesmen who rushed over to watch. Duo Li and the others were also there to join in the fun. The people who went into the quagmire gained a lot tonight. They didn't have the shaman's third eye, nor did they have Xiaofan's special vision. They could only use nets or their intuition to catch things. Even if they didn't have the third eye, they could still feel some things in the quagmire. Ah, it's the universal pupil. Someone in the crowd exclaimed. Who? Who caught the universal pupil? The people who were watching from other places rushed over. Not long after, someone shouted from the other side of the quagmire, another one. What? Who caught it this time? The crowd rushed over again. 30 already. Let's see who can catch more than me today. A Jing warrior who had just been pulled out of the quagmire laughed loudly. They already gained so much in such a short time. How many would they be able to catch tonight? Just thinking about it made his mouth split open. I don't know why, but the ground eyes in the quagmire are especially easy to catch today. Many of them aren't moving, someone sighed. The shaman in the house heard this and his face twitched. Many of the ground eyes couldn't move, probably because they were scared. The pit that the Xiaofan made shocked many of them. Even if they didn't die, they were half dead. At least, they wouldn't be able to recover tonight. Those who went into the quagmire had to thank Xiaofan for their great harvest tonight. It was a bargain. The Jing shaman smiled helplessly and shook his head. These kids probably hadn't encountered such a good thing in a long time. They were all crazy with joy. Are you sure you don't want to trade the ground eye stones? Xiaofan asked. The Jing people had a lot of stock in their hands. Even if they didn't harvest much every year, after generations of accumulation, the amount was already frightening. But did they plan to keep all of this? That depends on what everyone thinks. The Jing shaman did not comment. Even though he had a different way of thinking and did not intend to change everyone's way of thinking, he would not stop them if they were willing to exchange what they had in their hands for resources to survive. Xiaofan rolled up the animal skin scroll and put it away. He thought for a moment and said, I have another question. Go ahead. The Jing shaman thought that Xiaofan had suddenly thought of something related to the fusion of the true eye. Xiaofan looked at the Jing shaman and asked, What do you see on my body? The Jing shaman stopped playing with the ground eye stones. He didn't expect Xiaofan to ask this question, but he did notice it. After thinking for a while, the Jing shaman said, A human figure. I saw a human figure behind you. The Jing shaman didn't plan to tell Xiaofan this at first. The ancestors of the Jing tribe had warned their descendants that even if they saw something that others couldn't, they shouldn't speak carelessly. It was easy to get into trouble. It was said that a long time ago, there were shamans in the Jing tribe who used their ability to see things that others couldn't see to get into trouble. That was why the Jing shaman stopped Miao when he noticed the abnormality on Xiaofan's body. He was worried that Miao would get into trouble if he spoke carelessly. But now that Xiaofan asked, even if the Jing shaman wanted to hide it, he couldn't. Plus, the Jing shaman felt that Xiaofan wouldn't cause them any trouble. Even if Xiaofan was mentally prepared, he was still stunned when he heard this. What did the figure look like? The Jing shaman shook his head. I don't know. I only saw a blurry figure, but I don't know what it looked like. It must be one of Yanjiao's ancestors. It really was one of Yanjiao's ancestors? Xiaofan was extremely shocked. He had told the drumming shaman this excuse before, but at that time, he only used one of his ancestors as an excuse. But now that he heard the Jing shaman's words, did he really get it right? But why was one of his ancestors following him? Which ancestor was it? There were many ancestors in Yanjiao's history. Thinking about the bone ornament necklace, Xiaofan analyzed the possibility of it being a first shaman. After a moment of silence, Xiaofan shook his head. If he couldn't figure it out, then he wouldn't think about it. He would think about it when he had other clues in the future. Xiaofan gave the Jing shaman a palm-sized token made of green bronze. There were Yanjiao totem patterns on it, and the word Xian on the other side. In Yanjiao, only the current shaman-in-chief, as well as Xiaofan, the great elder, could have such a token. If the Jing tribe wanted to trade with ground ice stones in the future, they could bring this token to the Flaming River trading point. When people with this token went to the Flaming River trading point, they would naturally be treated better than others. There would also be people protecting them. By the time they finished talking, it was already almost sunrise. Because of Xiaofan's attack, a lot of mud had splashed onto the ground. Now, with the Jing people pulling nets in the mud and messing around, there was even more mud being dragged onto the shore. When Xiaofan left the Jing shaman's place, many places in the Jing tribe were covered in mud. Needless to say, the areas close to the mud were covered in mud. Other areas were stepped on by people running around. Some people were even rolling on the ground with mud all over their bodies. It was said that after rolling on the ground, they wouldn't be bitten by insects. There weren't many weeds in the Jing tribe, probably because of the mud. For some reason, the mud always inhibited the growth of plants, but it was very suitable for the ground eyes. The Jing tribe was a very special tribe. They weren't strong, but they were very satisfied with their lives in their own little world. Compared to resources, they were more willing to protect the ground ice stones. Although the river had disappeared, the Flaming River was still very wide in this area. It was even wider than the drumming tribe's area. Perhaps, if they continued to go downstream, the two sides of the river would be further apart. The further they went, the less likely the beasts on the other side would come. However, it wasn't absolutely safe. There were beasts that could cross the river, and there were also birds that could fly. They had to be careful of all of these. Before Xiaofan left, he reminded the Jing shaman of these problems. However, the Jing shaman had his own plans. After the full moon, they planned to expand the outer quagmire and the central quagmire. Then, they would ask the tribesmen to help them dig some emergency tunnels. The Jing shaman's third eye could not only see things that others couldn't, but it could also predict the future. If there was trouble, he would be prepared. Just like what Xiaofan knew, even if it was a small tribe that wasn't strong, they still had their reasons for surviving. When the sun replaced the moon's rays on the earth, Xiaofan prepared to bring the Yanjiao people back. He learned about the situation downstream from Dipai and Dipa. Although they didn't know much, they could still roughly tell what tribes were further downstream. Xiaofan gave them some beast hides and horns as a reward for the information. If you need anything in the future, feel free to look for us, ye tribesmen. We go to many places, Dipai said to Xiaofan and the others after he hid the things Xiaofan gave him in a tunnel. The tribesmen liked to dig tunnels when they had nothing to do. Then, they would visit other tribes and gossip. What they said might be exaggerated, but there was still a lot of useful information. At the very least, it helped Xiaofan's map of the area along the river become more complete. Before they left, Xiaofan also gave the Jing shaman some extra beast hides as a reward for his last question. When they left, the Jing shaman even brought the Jing tribesmen to the riverbank to send them off. There was a stone tablet with the words, "Flaming River," on it. From now on, the Jing tribesmen would know what the river in front of their tribe was called. They also knew that if they followed the Flaming River upstream, they would be able to find the Yanjiao tribe. What kind of tribe was the Yanjiao tribe? The Jing tribesmen's impression of the Yanjiao tribe was that they had big boats that were bigger than houses, sharp weapons, thick beast hides, and a lot of strength. They were not as fierce as the Ya tribesmen were rumored to be, although they were sometimes quite scary. After bidding farewell to the Jing tribe, the Xiaofan took the map that he had drawn and turned the boat around to head upstream. The trip downstream took less time than the Xiaofan expected, but the harvest was not bad. The most important thing was that they managed to get the true eye. All they had to do was wait for Caesar to try it out. When they traveled upstream, it was much faster than when they came out. They didn't have to go to the riverbank to put up a stone tablet. Also, after the full moon, the flow of the river would change. Even though the river had disappeared, some of the phenomena still existed. For example, before the full moon, the river would flow faster downstream than usual. The river level would not drop much, but if you looked closely, you would notice that the drop was very obvious. After the full moon, the river would flow back, which made it easier for Xiaofan and the others to go back. Along the way, Xiaofan and the others went to the drumming tribe to take a look. The tribe had already been rebuilt. The houses were all built. The tribe had recovered quite well. When Xiaofan and the others were about to reach the tribe, they saw the crocodiles that had left during the rainy season returning in groups. Even though the river was gone, their habits were still there. It was just that they were slower in coming back. The drumming tribe has a lot of water moon stones again, Xiaofan said as he looked at the groups of crocodiles swimming upstream. He also saw the familiar mute crocodile and threw some freshly hunted meat to them. Even though most of the crocodiles in the drumming tribe were not fearsome beasts, there were a lot of them. They were also considered strong beasts. If they swam in groups like this, there wouldn't be much trouble. The group of crocodiles was faster than Xiaofan's boat, so they arrived at the drumming tribe first. Xiaofan and the others arrived 3 days later. Nothing major happened in the tribe while Xiaofan and the others were away. It was the same at the Flaming River trading point, or at least it seemed that way. After returning to the tribe, the first thing Xiaofan wanted to do was to install an eye for Caesar. After not seeing him for a while, Caesar's body had new injuries. Everyone was already used to this. Xiaofan took out the bamboo tube that the shaman used to install the true eye and shook it in front of Caesar. "Give it a try." Chapter 667. Caesar was originally an ordinary wolf, brought back by Lang Jie to be Xiaofan's food. However, Xiaofan didn't eat it and raised it instead. Speaking of which, Caesar didn't have a strong bloodline like Cha-Cha. It was completely transformed into a ferocious beast by Xiaofan. Now, Caesar didn't have an eye, so Xiaofan tried to install an eye for him. He wasn't sure if it would succeed, but he could only try. Xiaofan took Caesar to a remote mountain at the edge of the tribe's territory. The soil there wasn't suitable for planting, and the stone wasn't good enough to make weapons. There weren't any wanderers living there, and only some patrolling warriors would rest there. When Xiaofan arrived, there was a group of patrolling warriors resting there. When they saw Xiaofan, they hurriedly greeted him. When they heard that Xiaofan had something to do here, they didn't say anything and hurried down the mountain. However, they didn't go far, but stood guard at a distance to prevent others from disturbing them. Caesar still had doubts in his eyes. Although he could understand a lot of words, Xiaofan didn't say much before, so he was still confused. Today, there was a hunting team out, but he didn't go with them. Xiaofan took out the animal skin roll that recorded the precautions, and read it again from beginning to end. Although he had read this animal skin roll several times on the way back, he still read it again before he started, and simulated the next steps in his mind. "Okay, come here and lie down." Xiaofan called Caesar. Caesar was already very big now. When he lay down, his back was almost the same height as a human, let alone when he stood up. Now that Xiaofan wanted to install an eye for him, of course he had to lie down. He didn't understand what Xiaofan wanted to do, but Caesar still lay down obediently and rested his head on the ground between his two front paws. Xiaofan removed the blindfold on Caesar's right eye. There was no eyeball inside, and the eyelid was slightly sunken. Caesar's upper and lower eyelids were always closed. The injuries from back then had already healed, and all the new injuries were from hunting. However, his right eye was protected by the blindfold, so it wasn't scratched. "Caesar, this is the true eye from the Jing tribe. The Jing people can use this to grow another eye." Xiaofan pointed at the bamboo tube in his hand. Caesar's ears twitched as he looked at the bamboo tube expectantly. "But, I don't know if it will work. People from different tribes can't use it. You're a fearsome beast, not a human, so you don't fall under this category. However, you've been marked before, so you have the aura of the Yinjiao fire seed. This is a little risky, but we still have to try. If it doesn't work, then forget it." Back then, Caesar was personally marked by Xiaofan with the power of the Yinjiao totem. Caesar had been in the tribe for so many years and participated in every ritual, so he naturally absorbed some of the power of the fire seed. This was what Xiaofan was worried about. The more power he had, the more obvious the rejection would be, and the lower the success rate. He had to give it a try. With a sigh, Xiaofan opened the bamboo tube and took out the ground eye sealed in mud. Just as the shaman had said, the meat of the ground eye wouldn't spoil easily if it was sealed in mud. Xiaofan washed away the mud and untied the rope on top. When he opened the shell of the ground eye, the meat was still the same as when Xiaofan saw it. There were no changes. He took out the meat of the ground eye, broke it open, and took out the true eye. After washing the meat, Xiaofan cut some and passed it to Caesar. "Eat this first." Caesar sniffed it curiously, then opened his mouth and ate it. Xiaofan observed for a while and didn't see anything strange with Caesar. Only then did he let him eat the rest. After Caesar ate the entire ground eye meat, Xiaofan slightly pried open the eyelid of Caesar's right eye, where there was no eyeball. Where there was no eyeball, there was only some red flesh. Unlike the shaman who had a third eye in between his eyebrows, Caesar didn't have to make an opening. Xiaofan fixed Caesar's right eyelid with one hand and held the black true eye with the other. He carefully placed it there and pushed it in slightly. Xiaofan didn't dare to push it too far. If the rejection from the true eye was too strong, it would be like what the shaman had said. He would have to dig it out again. After Xiaofan placed the true eye into Caesar's right eye, the black true eye surroundings began to change after about 2 breaths. The flesh around Caesar's right eye started to close in on the black true eye. Thin blood vessels covered most of the true eye. Other than the part that was facing the outside, the rest of the true eye was covered in blood vessels. Then, a layer of white membrane appeared where the blood vessels covered. Not long after, it began to swell. "Ayo," Caesar shook his head in discomfort. Xiaofan released his hand and asked, "How is it?" The true eye had already begun to change. "It should be working, right?" Caesar only felt a little uncomfortable. From time to time, he wanted to use his forelimbs to push his eyes out, but Xiaofan stopped him. Xiaofan noticed that Caesar's closed right eye had begun to bulge. Caesar wanted to rub his head against the ground, but Xiaofan stopped him. If that was all, it would be fine. Xiaofan had heard from the shaman about the violent reaction from failed fusion. Caesar's situation didn't seem like he was being strongly rejected by the ground eye. This was a good thing. Caesar probably knew that his right eye was changing. Although he felt uncomfortable, he tried his best to endure it. He only struggled a little when he couldn't help it, but Xiaofan stopped him. Some mud-like liquid flowed out from Caesar's right eye. Xiaofan frowned, but when he looked at Caesar, he didn't see any violent reaction, so he didn't do anything. If Caesar suddenly struggled violently, he would have to consider forcefully pulling the true eye out. The shaman had mentioned this before. Some people in the Jing tribe would experience this when they fused, so it wasn't strange. The mud-like liquid dripped onto the ground and gradually seeped into the soil. The grass that was originally growing there withered at a speed visible to the naked eye. The upright stalks of grass bent and the entire plant fell down. Xiaofan saw this and frowned even more. This was obviously not a normal tear. The shaman didn't mention this before. Since there weren't many grass in the Jing tribe, it was understandable that the shaman didn't mention this. The mud-like liquid kept flowing out from Caesar's right eye, but the color gradually faded until it was as transparent as a normal tear. The transparent liquid that dripped onto the ground didn't have the same effect on the grass as before. Xiaofan let out a sigh of relief. It seemed like things were going in a good direction. Even so, Xiaofan didn't dare to be careless. After all, just like the shaman said, he had never heard of anyone putting a true eye on a fearsome beast, let alone one that had been branded. Before the process ended, he couldn't be careless. The tear-like liquid in Caesar's right eye gradually stopped flowing down. The bulging eyelid also slowly shrank down. It wasn't that obvious anymore. Xiaofan looked at Caesar's perfectly fine left eye, then looked at his right eye. Both sides were almost the same. They weren't sunken or bulging. Xiaofan wanted to pry open Caesar's right eye to see how the true eye had changed, but the fusion wasn't over yet. Xiaofan didn't dare to move recklessly. If he interfered with the fusion, all his efforts would be in vain. After another half an hour, Caesar suddenly shook and began to struggle violently. It's starting to reject? Xiaofan stared intently at Caesar's reaction. If the rejection intensified, he would take action and dig the true eye out. Although it would hurt Caesar, under the strong rejection of the true eye, the longer it dragged on, the greater the damage Caesar would suffer. It might even put his life in danger. This was what the shaman had warned Xiaofan before. Just as Xiaofan was about to take action, Caesar stopped struggling. The eyelid in his right eye moved, as if he was trying to open his eye. After losing his right eye, Caesar couldn't even move his eyelid, let alone open his eye. Now that he was trying to open his eye, it was already a huge improvement. After opening it a few times, the eyelid finally opened slowly. Xiaofan saw that in Caesar's right eye, there was a white eyeball. There was also a black dot in the middle of the eyeball. The size of the black dot was exactly the same as the true eye. However, compared to the entire eyeball, the black dot in the middle was too small. However, very quickly, Xiaofan saw that the black dot was surrounded by tightly arranged strands of filaments. Gray-brown extended outwards from the black dot. As for the black dot in the middle, it seemed to be expanding at the same frequency as the heart due to the stretching of these tightly arranged filaments. Xiaofan had once wondered how such a small true eye could change. It was much smaller than Caesar's eye. The shaman had told him that the true eye would change according to the fusion. Now, it seemed that this was indeed the case. Caesar's right eye was gradually becoming complete, becoming similar to his left eye. The black pupil in the middle was also expanding at the same time as his left eye. It was done. Looking at Caesar's right eye, which was almost the same as his left eye, Xiaofan finally relaxed. He waved his fist forcefully. This was smoother than he had expected. Although there were signs of rejection during the fusion, it was not strong. In the end, he succeeded. Caesar seemed to have not gotten used to the sudden improvement of his right eye. After all, he had only had one eye for so long. Now that his field of vision had suddenly expanded, he was a little confused. However, he soon became happy. He stood up and jumped on the spot. Then, he raised his head and howled excitedly. Whoa! At the foot of the mountain, the patrol team heard the howl and looked up in confusion. Caesar's howl sounds very excited. One of the team members said. Caesar is a good wolf. It's a pity that he's blind in one eye, another person said regretfully. So what if he's blind in one eye? Caesar can still hunt. He's quite powerful, a young warrior said. He was even more powerful when both of his eyes were intact. What a pity. Someone wanted to say something, but when he saw Xiaofan coming over with Caesar, he immediately stopped talking. Caesar seemed to be particularly excited today. When he walked past the patrol team, he bumped into them. However, he didn't use much strength. For the Yanjiao warriors, that was just playing around. A few of the patrol team bumped into and played with Caesar for a while before they watched Caesar and Xiaofan leave. What's wrong, boss? The person who had just played with Caesar asked with a smile. He saw the leader standing next to him, staring at the wolf in the distance. Didn't you guys notice? The leader stared straight at the wolf in the distance. Notice what? Caesar's eyes. What's the point of noticing that? It's not good to stare at someone's blind eye. Even if it's a wolf, it won't be happy. Look at Caesar's eyes just now. The person who was speaking suddenly paused. The rest of the team also seemed to be strangled. Not a single word came out of their mouths. Fuck. Chapter 668. Caesar hopped all the way back. The wanderers who were busy working in the fields saw it from afar. It hopped like a rabbit and stopped to look around. If it saw someone familiar, it would howl as if it was greeting them. At first, everyone thought that Caesar was in a good mood because of Xiaofan's return. But soon, more and more people noticed that Caesar's right eye, which was supposed to be covered with an eye patch and had lost an eyeball, was still intact. There was not a single flaw, and it did not look like a fake. How is this possible? The wanderers who stood in the fields and watched Caesar walk away only regained their senses after a while. Their faces were full of disbelief as they asked their comrades beside them, "Did I see wrongly?" "No, definitely not. I saw it too." "Could it be that fearsome beasts can grow their own eyes?" someone guessed. After all, some fearsome beasts had the ability to regenerate, but they had never heard of a wolf-type fearsome beast with such an ability. Plus, if they could regenerate, why would they wait until now? How long had it been? Caesar brought a new topic of discussion to the tribe. Xiaofan didn't announce it publicly because he didn't know if it would succeed. Since it was successful, Xiaofan explained it to everyone when they went up the mountain for a meeting. The Jing tribe's true eye. Xing didn't even care about his beloved pottery today. He ran over to Xiaofan to ask about Caesar's eye. The others had the same goal. Even Zheng Luo and Duo Kong, who had been guarding the Flaming River trading point, came over. After all, some warriors in the tribe had lost their eyes too. If they could grow their eyes back like Caesar, it would be very exciting. However, after hearing what Xiaofan told them about the Jing shaman's words, their eager hearts cooled down. Bloodline, fire seed, these unchangeable factors could cause a strong rejection. If they lost their lives for an eye, it wouldn't be worth it. Some things couldn't be forced. Putting aside the matter of the true eye for the time being, they were very curious about the universal eyes that Xiaofan had brought back. Although the ground eye stones were beautiful, to most Yanjiao people, especially those who lived here, the ground eye stones were not even as important as a piece of meat. The people from the other side of the sea, on the other hand, were more interested in the ground eye stones. They were more astute and sensitive when it came to trading. They were also the main force in the Flaming River trading point. The universal pupil not only surprised the people who came back from the other side of the sea, but also attracted the attention of the local people. When hunting, if they went to an unfamiliar area and encountered heavy clouds, without any directional tools, they would find a place to wait for the sun to come out and then identify the direction. But now that they had the universal eyes, they no longer needed to wait for the sky to clear up. This is better than the sun stone. Zheng Luo picked up a universal eye and carefully observed it in his hand to see if it was pointing in the right direction. It can distinguish the light of the sun and the moon. This is good stuff. Ao was also excited. The shaman gave them a total of 18 universal eyes. The 5 elders, including Xiaofan, received 1 each. As the chief and shaman, Guizhe and Gigu each received 1. Ta and Duokong each received 1. The remaining 9 were left with Gigu. If anyone wanted to go on a long journey in the future, they could ask him for more. According to the tribe's rules, everyone was a team. Whatever they received would be managed by the same group. Xiaofan had no intention of monopolizing it. However, since he had received more ground ice stones, he had more say in this matter. Right, the people from the Hui tribe sent us a beast skin scroll today. Zheng Luo took out a beast skin scroll that they had just received and passed it to Gigu. Gigu's expression darkened after reading it. There are people coming from the other side of the sea. They're finally here? No, there's just some movement. As for who exactly is coming, we're not sure yet. There was a strange movement in the desert. There might have been a conflict, but we don't know the details yet, Gigu said. With the people from Rock Hill City guarding, even if there are people coming, there won't be many, Xiaofan said. Indeed, there won't be many, but it's still better to be on guard. From now on, increase the patrol area, especially around the Flaming River trading point. No one objected to Gigu's decision. Is there anyone coming from this side? Xiaofan asked. Gigu passed the beast skin scroll to Xiaofan. I don't know about the other tribes, but I heard that the robbers are on the move. Every time they mentioned the robbers, they felt so disgusted that they wanted to throw up everything they ate yesterday. They stole people's belongings and were proud of it instead of being ashamed. It could be said that the robbers were publicly acknowledged by all tribes to be on guard against. However, as the 2 continents got closer, and there were many good things on the other side of the sea, it was not surprising that the robbers were attracted there. If the robbers went there, their main targets would be the slave masters with large amounts of wealth. Thinking of this, everyone felt quite satisfied. Let the robbers go and annoy the slave masters. It's a good thing for us that the robbers are attracted by the robbers. Zheng Luo smiled gloatingly. Obviously, the others thought so too. No matter what, since there was already movement on the other side, and it had been a year since the disaster, what was to come would come. Although it wouldn't affect the Flaming Horn tribe much in the short term, it was better to be prepared in advance. After the meeting, Xiaofan went down the mountain. Caesar had just run up and down the mountain like crazy, as if he wanted to let everyone know about his changes. He even ran to a few fearsome beasts in the tribe to show off before going home. Old Ku looked at Caesar's changes and his old face was full of smiles. It's good that it's grown back. Old Ku thought of something and asked Xiaofan, Caesar's I won't have any problems in the future, right? From the looks of it, it should be fine for now. The rejection wasn't obvious during the fusion either. According to the Jing shaman, there shouldn't be any problems after the fusion, Xiaofan answered. It's amazing. They look exactly the same, so there shouldn't be any difference in their vision, right? That depends on Caesar's performance when he hunts in the future. If it was the same as before, there shouldn't be any problems. Although according to the Jing shaman, Caesar's I wouldn't have any problems after the fusion, Caesar's situation was different after all, so he still needed to observe for a few days. With his right eye again, when Caesar went out to hunt for food, the food he brought back was different from when he only had one eye. In the past, he caught some heavy fearsome beasts that were not good at hiding and were not fast. Now, he brought back some more difficult to catch prey. The injuries on his body were also a lot less. It seemed that the lack of an eye was a big limitation. Just when everyone thought that Caesar's new eye would have no problems, Caesar began to act strangely. After showing off for 2 days, Caesar began to look a little irritated. He no longer ran up and down the mountain, but lay down in front of his house. At first, Caesar would occasionally use his forelimbs to rub his eye. After all, he wasn't human and his claws weren't as nimble. Every time, he had to tilt his head and use his claws to rub his eye. However, when Xiaofan examined him, he didn't find any abnormalities in his new right eye. It was still the same as when the true eye was fused. Moreover, when Caesar used his claws to rub his eye, he didn't just rub his right eye, he also rubbed his left eye. What's wrong with it? Old Ko was worried. I don't know either. Xiaofan looked at Caesar and felt uneasy. The fusion of the true eye was too smooth, but now this was happening. Could it be the delayed rejection of the true eye? As an elder, Xiaofan didn't have to patrol in shifts. Xiaofan didn't go to the Flaming River trading point either. Instead, he stayed at home to guard Caesar's eye. On the 5th day after the right eye was born, Caesar seemed to be even more irritated. The frequency of him rubbing his eye with his claws increased. Sometimes, he would even growl. He looked very annoyed. Perhaps he felt that his claws weren't nimble enough to rub his eye, so he would just rub his eye on the ground. Xiaofan couldn't find the reason. He guessed that it was the delayed rejection of the true eye. It was a side effect after the eye was born, so both his wolf eyes were affected. However, every time he looked at Caesar's eyes, he didn't find any abnormalities. However, Caesar was getting more and more irritated. At first, he was rubbing his eye on the ground, but now, he was banging his head on the ground. He would even run out and hit trees. However, other than these abnormal behaviors, there were no other changes in Caesar's body. There were no signs of rejection during the fusion of the true eye like the shaman said. His 2 wolf eyes were still normal. It was just that his gaze became more ferocious due to his irritability. Sometimes, when people from the tribe came to visit Caesar, they would be frightened by the look in his eyes. As the days passed, Caesar's behavior of knocking his head on the ground and trees became more and more serious. Eventually, he even felt that knocking his head on the ground wasn't enough. He knocked his head on the ground until it bled. No matter how strong a fearsome beast's recovery ability was, it couldn't withstand his constant banging. This kind of self-abuse made many people in the tribe worried. As expected, the true eye of the Jing tribe wasn't that easy to install. Xiaofan went to the Guizhe to ask for some medicine. The Guizhe was trained to be the successor of the shaman since he was young, so he knew a lot about medicine and diseases. However, he had never seen a situation like Caesar's, so he couldn't understand the symptoms. He could only try to make some supportive medicine that could calm the beast down or strengthen its immune system. However, Caesar's condition didn't get better because of this. What should we do? The Guizhe passed the medicine he made to the Xiaofan. She looked through all the records left by her ancestors, but none of them matched. After all, most of the records were about humans. There were very few records about fearsome beasts. I plan to take him to the Jing tribe and see if the Jing shaman can help him. As soon as Xiaofan finished speaking, the Lang Jie hurriedly ran up the mountain to find the Xiaofan. Caesar ran away. Did he knock his head on the mountain again? The Xiaofan asked. No, he ran out of the tribe and went into the forest. There's something wrong with him. The Lang Jie was on patrol today. When he saw Caesar pass by their patrol team like the wind, he followed him for a while. When he saw that something was wrong, he immediately ran over to find the Xiaofan. The Xiaofan's expression changed. He put down the medicine bag in his hand and followed the Lang Jie down the mountain. They chased after Caesar. Chapter 669. While Lang Jie was looking for Xiaofan, Caesar had already run out of the tribe's territory. Some of the patrol team split off to follow him, but it didn't take long for them to be left behind. They weren't out hunting, and they didn't have enough equipment. It wasn't a wise decision to chase after him rashly. Should they chase? For a moment, they hesitated. Just then, Lang Jie caught up with Xiaofan, and they asked Xiaofan, "Why don't we go back and prepare some tools before going out to chase?" Only with preparation could they track him for a longer time. Otherwise, forget about tracking him, they might not even be able to keep their lives in the forest. No need. You guys go back and continue patrolling. I can follow him alone, Xiaofan said. How can you do it alone? Lang Jie disagreed. The others didn't agree either. Xiaofan pointed above his head. Lang Jie and the others looked up and saw an eagle. Seeing Cha-Cha flying over, Lang Jie and the others understood. It was indeed faster and safer to track him from the air. Without further ado, Lang Jie and the others returned to the tribe to continue patrolling. Xiaofan let Cha-Cha lead them to look for Caesar's tracks from the air. There were some traces of trees being knocked down in the forest below. Those were left by Caesar. As long as they followed these traces, they would definitely be able to catch up. According to Lang Jie and the others, Caesar was like a madman when he ran out. In the past, he would greet the patrolling warriors when he went out looking for food and play a game of bumping. Even a few days ago when he was irritated and tortured himself, he would stop for a moment when he saw the patrolling warriors. Then he would avoid places with people and run into trees. But today, he simply ignored everything and rushed out directly. Xiaofan was worried that Caesar's condition wasn't quite right today. If the true eye had triggered a delayed rejection reaction, then the side effects would be huge. It was as if it was trying to drive Caesar crazy. However, even if they found Caesar, how should they deal with him? Gouge out the right eye that had already grown back. The pain was probably even worse than when he lost his right eye, but compared to his life, it was not that important. But what Xiaofan was worried about was that both of Caesar's eyes might have been affected. After all, Caesar's movements during this period of time were not limited to his right eye. When he raised his claws, he rubbed them on both eyes. Was he going to destroy both his eyes? Thinking of this, Xiaofan couldn't help but regret. This was no longer within the range of rejection that the shaman had mentioned. It had also exceeded Xiaofan's expectations. Letting out a long sigh, the veins on his arms bulged because of his clenched fists. Xiaofan looked down at the forest below. No matter what, even if Caesar lost both of his eyes, it was fine as long as he could live and become normal again. It didn't matter if he couldn't continue hunting. He could hunt more prey and raise a wolf. The deeper they went into the forest, the denser the forest became. There were also more towering ancient trees. Looking from above, Caesar's tracks were not obvious. Cha-Cha's eagle eye couldn't distinguish them, so it was much more difficult to track him down. Fortunately, Caesar had been engraved by Xiaofan. Although this connection couldn't be compared to the enslaved sapphire, as long as they weren't too far apart, Xiaofan could still sense some of it. Go that way. Xiaofan pointed in a direction and signaled Cha-Cha to fly there. Even if Caesar wasn't in the right state and seemed to have lost his mind and become manic, the route he chose was still familiar to him. It wasn't the hunting route of the hunting team, but the route Caesar took when he was looking for food. Xiaofan had followed him a few times, so he had some impression of it. Cha-Cha often went out with Caesar to look for food, so it was more familiar with this route. The direction that Xiaofan pointed to was Caesar's hunting route. Cha-Cha barked, indicating that it had understood Caesar's direction. The sun was setting, and the day was coming to an end. It was close to dusk, and it would be even harder to track him down at night. After all, Cha-Cha's perception at night wasn't as good as during the day. They still couldn't see Caesar's figure, but Xiaofan could feel that he was getting closer. It was just that Caesar was still running, so he couldn't close the distance immediately. Night fell. Since the full moon period of the 2 moons had just passed, the separated moons were still very big, and the moonlight was enough to illuminate the night. The flying insects hiding in the darkness spread their wings and flew towards the light source in the sky along a spiral trajectory. Even in the air, Xiaofan could see the situation in the forest below. Even if it was pitch black, Xiaofan could still see with his special vision. But now, it was more dependent on Xiaofan's perception to identify the exact location. Keep flying in that direction, we are very close. Cha-Cha's flying speed was much slower at night. It usually moved during the day, so it knew which birds were in the sky, but it didn't know so much at night. It had to be careful. It couldn't be careless because of tracking, or it and Xiaofan would both be killed. A wolf's howl came from afar. It wasn't the usual excited howl, but more like a meaningless howl, as if it was suppressing something. After the howl sounded once, there was no more movement. After flying for a while, Xiaofan got down from the eagle's back and landed on the ground. He could sense that Caesar was nearby, but he couldn't pinpoint his exact location from the sky. The ancient trees were too dense, so he could only search on the ground. Cha-Cha was scouting from the sky. If it saw any threat, it would warn Xiaofan. But in the forest at night, there were more predators lurking in the darkness. It couldn't be seen from above, so Xiaofan had to be careful. In the forest, Xiaofan smelled a trace of blood. Judging from the smell, it was still fresh. He followed the smell and quickly heard some biting and gnawing sounds. Xiaofan's heart tightened, and he quickened his pace. The branches above blocked most of the moonlight, but the moonlight that shone through the broken branches still allowed Xiaofan to see the situation clearly. There was a beast carcass there, but it didn't look like Caesar's. This made Xiaofan breathe a sigh of relief. The dead dire beast wasn't big. It was a nocturnal predator, good at ambushing and fast. There were other nocturnal beasts gnawing around it. Carcasses like this in the forest would soon turn into skeletons. Within 30 days, there wouldn't be many bones left. Xiaofan wanted to check the wound on the carcass to see if it was Caesar's. There were traces of wolf claws here, but there were 3 dire beasts gnawing there, and other nocturnal beasts had rushed over after smelling the blood. Xiaofan's main goal now was to find Caesar. He didn't want to get into a conflict with these nocturnal beasts for the time being. Thus, Xiaofan quietly left, circling around the area and continuing to follow the trace of feeling. There was still a faint smell of blood in the air, but Xiaofan didn't see the tree that had been hit. He was close. He was very close. Xiaofan carefully approached. He didn't know if Caesar was still sane. If it really went crazy, it might even attack him, so Xiaofan had to be careful. He also brought some poisonous needles with strong anesthetic effects. If Caesar really went crazy and couldn't control himself, he would directly poison Caesar and bring it back. He couldn't leave it here. A dire beast that had lost its mind couldn't survive in the forest for long. There were too many smart predators, and if he wasn't careful, he could fall into their trap. Xiaofan didn't want to bring back a wolf skeleton that had been gnawed clean. A low growl came from not far away. It wasn't loud, as if it was suppressing some kind of pain. Xiaofan could tell that it was Caesar's voice. It was good that it was still alive. Xiaofan continued to approach. The closer he got, the clearer the smell of blood became. Although it wasn't strong, Xiaofan could smell it. Some nocturnal beasts had already been attracted by the smell of blood, but they were still lingering nearby. They didn't dare to rush over, as if they were hesitant and vigilant of something. Xiaofan looked not far away. There was a figure lying on the ground with its back to him. It was Caesar, who had run out. Xiaofan wanted to shout, but when he thought of the current situation, he just bent his finger and put it to his mouth and blew a whistle. The whistle wasn't too abrupt among the chirping of insects and active nocturnal birds, and it wouldn't attract the attention of the nocturnal beasts. It was the whistle Xiaofan usually blew when he was hunting, and it was also a whistle that Caesar was familiar with. After Xiaofan blew the whistle, the figure lying on the ground slowly stood up and turned to look in Xiaofan's direction. Xiaofan was standing on an ancient tree not far away. Caesar turned around and looked in its direction. Some of the moonlight shone down, causing Caesar's eyes to reflect a faint green light in the darkness. Xiaofan couldn't see its eyes, but he could feel that Caesar's breathing was still stable. Although it had run so far and had probably fought with other vicious beasts, its body was covered in wounds, and its throat was still gasping for breath. There were no signs of it going berserk. Xiaofan wasn't sure if Caesar had regained consciousness, so he blew the whistle again. The rhythmic whistle contained a message that Xiaofan had taught Caesar a long time ago when he was training it. It meant, "Come here." Caesar took 2 steps toward Xiaofan, but stopped and lowered its head to raise a front paw. Just when Xiaofan thought it was going to rub its eyes with its paw again, it paused and lowered its paw. Then it looked up at Xiaofan. The 2 green eyes appeared in the darkness once again. In Xiaofan's other hand behind his back, 3 stone needles were stained with plant toxins. Caesar's condition wasn't very good, so he planned to take it back. However, just as Xiaofan was about to make a move, his movements suddenly stopped. Xiaofan looked at Caesar in shock. In the darkness, another green dot of light appeared above the 2 eyes of the wolf that were glowing with a faint green light. This was, Xiaofan looked at Caesar in shock. As Caesar moved closer, Xiaofan could see it more clearly. Caesar's head was badly mangled because of its masochistic headbutting, especially its forehead. There wasn't a single piece of undamaged skin, but in the midst of the mangled flesh, a vertical eye appeared. A third eye. How could there be a third eye? Chapter 670. He thought it was the delayed rejection of the true eye, but he didn't expect to see something like this. It turned out that the reason why he had been acting strangely was because of the third eye. Xiaofan didn't understand why this happened. A true eye could only grow 1 eye. The shaman and the others had a third eye because both of their eyes were normal. But now, why did Caesar have a third eye after his right eye? When he put it in, he only put it in his right eye. What was the difference between this third eye and the other 2? Unfortunately, Caesar couldn't speak, so he couldn't tell Xiaofan what he was feeling in detail. Xiaofan temporarily gave up on the idea of bringing him back. Caesar wasn't angry right now. His emotions were stable and he didn't hit the ground again. He was confused. Xiaofan was confused too. After Xiaofan blew the whistle, he probably understood the order. Xiaofan saw that Caesar was walking towards them, but he stopped because his third eye opened. After understanding the reason for Caesar's strange behavior, Xiaofan calmed down a little. This meant that it wasn't a delayed rejection, and the other 2 eyes weren't damaged either. While Xiaofan was thinking, Caesar suddenly tilted his head. All 3 of his eyes were looking at the bushes on the side, and he let out a low growl. There was a nocturnal beast hiding there. It thought it was well hidden and was planning to ambush Caesar, but it didn't expect Caesar to notice it first. His growl was a message to the nocturnal beast hiding behind the bushes: "I found you, get out of here." Actually, when he looked into Caesar's newly opened third eye, even though he could not see the eyes clearly due to the green light, he felt a sense of familiarity. It was similar to the Jing shamans and Miu's gazes when he was in the Jing tribe, but they were not exactly the same. Perhaps it was because the fuse together was different, so the emotions they contained were different. That was why the feeling was different. Maybe it was because the fuse together was different. Caesar's third eye made anyone who saw it feel like they would be found no matter if they were hiding in the bushes or behind a tree. Maybe this was why the nocturnal beasts that came over after smelling the scent of blood were hesitant and didn't move. They liked to ambush their prey. If they were discovered, it wouldn't be called ambushing. They preferred to kill in one strike, so they wouldn't move unless they were confident. That was why after Caesar's growl, the nocturnal beasts didn't leave immediately, but they didn't attack for the time being. They would continue to wait for an opportunity. The nocturnal beasts around them wouldn't move for the time being. Xiaofan looked at Caesar, who was standing there. He blew the whistle for the third time, the same sound as before. Caesar finally walked towards Xiaofan after hearing the whistle, but his footsteps were hesitant. He wasn't as straightforward as before. Xiaofan could even feel Caesar's puzzled gaze. What was it puzzled about? Could it be that he saw something? Xiaofan suddenly remembered what the shaman had said. He had said that there was a person behind him, and Caesar's third eye was similar to the shaman's. They were both born from the true eye. Did that mean that Caesar had also seen the person behind him? Was that why it had hesitated when it heard the command? However, even if Caesar had seen something it couldn't before, it still followed Xiaofan's command and walked over. It even let out a confused whimper. As soon as it heard the whimper, Xiaofan was sure that Caesar had regained consciousness. Its body was injured, so it wasn't suitable for it to stay where it was. It needed to find a place to treat its injuries. Let's go. Xiaofan turned around and walked back the way they came. At first, Xiaofan's speed wasn't fast, but when he heard the movement on the ground behind him, Xiaofan sped up and whistled for Cha-Cha in the sky to follow. It was nighttime, and Caesar was injured. After running so far, it must be tired. Not only it, Cha-Cha also needed to rest. Besides, it wasn't suitable for Cha-Cha to fly at night, so Xiaofan found a place to rest and treated Caesar's wounds. He didn't bring a medicine bag, so he didn't have much medicine on him. He could only make do with what he had. Fortunately, although Caesar's injuries looked frightening, they weren't serious. Some of the shallow wounds had already scabbed over. The more serious injuries were concentrated on its back and head. The injuries on its back were left behind when it was fighting with other vicious beasts, and the injuries on its head were left behind by itself. When they were resting, Xiaofan had a chance to take a good look at Caesar's third eye. Caesar didn't seem to be very good at controlling the third eye. After it opened, it took a long time before it stiffly closed. It was like a rusty machine, so its reactions weren't very agile. It also wasn't synchronized with the other two eyes. The skin around the third eye had hardened a lot. Xiaofan only noticed this when he was applying medicine on Caesar's wounds. This reminded him of the true eye he caught. When he cut open the true eye, there was also a layer of hardened flesh around the true eye. He didn't know if it was because of that, but if he had the chance in the future, he should go to the Jing tribe and ask. Xiaofan thought to himself. When Cha-Cha saw Caesar, he was even more shocked than when he found out Caesar was blind in one eye. In a moment of carelessness, this guy went from having only one eye to having three. Fearsome beasts had stronger recovery abilities than normal beasts. After one night, the wounds on Caesar's body had already scabbed over, and the smell of blood was not as strong as before. When Caesar woke up the next day, he was in good spirits. He was also clear-headed, but he still wasn't used to his third eye. Occasionally, he would raise his paw to rub it. Before this, Xiaofan always thought that he was rubbing his paw because there was something wrong with his eyes. Now, he understood that Cha-Cha actually wanted to rub the spot where his third eye grew out. It was mainly where he hit trees, the ground, and the mountains. Now that his third eye had grown out perfectly, the discomfort had subsided a lot, so he no longer banged his head around crazily. Perhaps, after some time, he would get used to his third eye. Because of the matter with his third eye, Caesar had used up a lot of his energy. After he recovered, he went to hunt for food. Caesar hunted faster than usual, but sometimes he would look at Xiaofan in confusion. To be exact, he was looking behind Xiaofan. "There's someone behind me, right?" Xiaofan said as he nibbled on a wild fruit. Caesar only whimpered twice. He looked behind Xiaofan with fear, but because he was close to Xiaofan, he wasn't as vigilant. "Don't worry about him. I'll find out who's behind this sooner or later." Xiaofan looked up into the sky. Cha-Cha had also finished hunting, so he erased all traces. "Let's go back." At the edge of the tribe, there were people standing guard. It was Lang Jie and the others. They were probably worried about Xiaofan, so they stood guard there. Everyone was carrying bags, ready to enter the forest if anything happened. When they saw the eagle in the sky, Lang Jie and the others were delighted. However, Xiaofan didn't sit on the eagle's back. Instead, he ran on the ground with Caesar. Caesar was injured, and because his third eye hadn't fully recovered, Xiaofan had to keep an eye on him. "The great elder is back." Someone looked ahead and said. "Caesar is back too. It's good that they're all back safely." Lang Jie happily ran forward for a while. He was the one who brought Caesar back to the tribe, so in the Yanjiao tribe, Lang Jie and Caesar had a good relationship. During this time, he was also worried about Caesar's condition and went to visit him several times. Now that he saw Caesar running back with Xiaofan, he was happy to welcome them. However, when he looked at Caesar, he felt that something was wrong. As Caesar ran closer, the smile on Lang Ga's face stiffened. His eyes widened, and he rubbed his eyes before continuing to stare. The others weren't any better than Lang Ga. They had heard that Caesar's condition was caused by his new right eye. Some people even discussed in private whether the way to recover Caesar was to remove his new eye. Therefore, when Caesar returned, they stared at Caesar's right eye. At first glance, the right eye was fine. When they looked again, the left eye was fine too. Both eyes were fine, but there was a strange feeling. The hairs on the back of their necks trembled. When they looked closer, fuck. What the hell? Because he couldn't control his new eye, Caesar's third eye was still wide open when he came back. It was even vertical. Originally, a direbeast's eyes looked more ferocious than a human's. Now, this combination looked even more terrifying. Moreover, when that eye looked over, it gave people a different feeling than an ordinary eye. Therefore, the shock that Caesar's third eye brought to them could not be described as small. Not to mention Lang Jie and the others, after Xiaofan brought Caesar back, everyone who saw Caesar was dumbfounded. Some time ago, when Caesar's right eye had just grown out, many people in the tribe had come to watch out of curiosity. Now, there were even more onlookers. After all, they had seen many wolves with two eyes. Even if the right eye had grown out, it would at least look like a normal wolf. However, they had never seen a wolf with three eyes. "I didn't expect this, I really didn't expect this. I thought only humans had three eyes. I didn't expect wolves to have it too." Duo Li wanted to take a closer look, but Caesar didn't allow anyone to touch his third eye. A few days after his third eye grew out, Caesar didn't show any signs of irritation. Even his movements of rubbing his eyes with his claws became less and less. At first, his third eye was just wide open and looked dull, but it gradually became more lively. Caesar could even control the blinking of his eyes. However, Caesar usually didn't open his third eye in the tribe because he noticed that everyone didn't seem to like his third eye. Every time they met his third eye's gaze, they would unconsciously feel nervous. Therefore, gradually, as he became more familiar with controlling his third eye, Caesar kept it closed. He would only open his third eye when he went out to look for food or when he went out to patrol with Xiaofan. When he didn't open his third eye, there was no trace of an eye on his forehead. It was impossible to tell that there was an eye there. If Miao was here, he would definitely tell Xiaofan that the situation of Caesar's third eye was very similar to his. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.